Chapter 79. As expected, there really was a glowing moon. The servants in the Fu had already prepared everything that was needed. Ming and Lu Wen Yarrow looked at the heated lanterns hanging in the pavilion and then at the two tables nearby, holding of a variety of foodstuffs. They finally understood what Ji meant by his earlier statement of no need to save. The four sat down around the table, each one taking a pair of the public chopsticks to start cooking in the pot. Even the not-so-favored Ming had rarely ever cooked on his own, and his ignorance about how long something could be cooked created laughter and lifted the mood of the meal. Luo Wen Yarrow looked at Chu Qingju rapidly picking up what she liked to cook in the pot. She always knew when to take the ingredients out when they were perfectly cooked. Luo Wen Yarrow couldn't help but look down at the people of Chang de Gongfu. Soro was the eldest Di daughter, no matter what had happened, but Soro had suffered so much. Otherwise, why else would she be so familiar about such matters? Ignorant of the fact that she had become a little white cabbage in the snow in Luo Wen Yarrow's heart, Chu Qingju contentedly drank a small bowl of silver tree fungus and date soup to wash away the spiciness in her mouth. She felt that she was 6/10 full before commenting, "It's been some days since I ate hot pot. This soup that our kitchen has made is getting better and better. It's all right to occasionally eat some. If you eat it every day, you won't like any kind of soup." Hung used a pair of public chopsticks to serve a tea tree mushroom into her bowl, smiling as he said, "You ate so much meat today that it will be hard to sleep." Chu Qingju picked up the tea tree mushroom to dabble in the condiments dish. After she finished eating, she pouted. "Then later, you have to play weiqi with me." "Fine," Hung grimaced. Turning, he started to put what Chu Qingju liked to eat into her bowl. Ming poured Luo Wen Yarrow a small bowl of silver tree fungus and date soup. Seeing Ji and Soro proficiently serve each other what they liked, he thought inside that he hadn't done enough. "Sai Di, your wounds have healed. You've gotten married now. Fu Huang has said that us brothers have to put more energy to state affairs. Why don't you go spend some time in the Ministry of Revenue? That could be considered as going to learn something new." Hung raised a cup to Ming and drank before continuing, "Even though I am the second eldest, I'm not even 2 years older than you. You should pay more attention to state affairs." Ming didn't refuse. Out of the 4 brothers, other than Dage who was 7 years older than him, Ji and Sanji weren't that much older than him. But both Ji and Sanji had been involved in state affairs for a long time. He was the only one who'd attended court after turning 16, but he still didn't have anything to do. Fu Huang never spent any attention on him, his mother wasn't favored, his maternal clan really didn't have anyone. The result was that he had muddled his way for 3 years at court yet had never accomplished anything. Now that Ji had said this, it was like giving him a helping hand to let him establish himself at court. "Thanks Ji, you Di definitely will learn how to do things, and not disappoint Ji." Ming raised the wine up, "You Di toasts Ji." Sitting on the side, Luo Wen Yarrow gave a grateful smile to Chu Qingju. Even though she didn't know the whole story, now that Duan Wang was willing to help her Wang Yi, from the bottom of her heart, she was grateful to Chu Qingju as Duan Wang Fei. A whole meal ended in contentedness. The 4 admired the moon for a while as they digested before returning their rooms. Hung naturally accompanied Chu Qingju in playing a weiqi game before gathering up the beauty into their warm den. A round of physical pleasure later, the two contentedly fell asleep. In the guest room, Luo Wen Yarrow took down her adornments and laid with Ming together on the bed. She hesitated for a long time before inquiring, "Wang Yi, does Erbi want to win you over?" "Silly Wen Yarrow, Ji has no need to win me over." Ming leaned back on the headboard, gathering the other in his embrace. "What I have, Ji also has. What I don't have, Ji still has. If I had not married you, Ji might not have been willing to help me." Luo Wen Yarrow stilled. She suddenly thought about her second aunt in Xiongqing Hu Fu and Duan Wang Fei who was very close to second aunt. Instantly, she understood. She hugged Ming in sympathy, comforting in a small voice, "That's because Wang Yi is capable so Erbi wants to help you. Otherwise, it doesn't matter who you married. It still wouldn't work out." Ming smiled as he patted her back, his laughter filling the entire room. Because of Qing de Emperor's serious illness, the people of Jing City were extremely anxious. However, After a few days, the emperor started to take a good turn and could even continue to attend court. Those whose intentions had risen settled down. Soon afterwards, the imperial censor wrote a complaint against Chang de Gongfu. He detailed the scandals of Chang de Gongfu, such as allowing servants to victimize others, putting out loans, buying the common people's land at low prices by using their positions. He also mentioned that 16 years ago, when the wife of the Duke of Changde had just passed away, he immediately married a new wife, which was a dishonorable thing. He even allowed the new Duchess of Changde, Liang Shu, to cheat others by using the position of the Duke, and abused the original wife's daughter as well as the Shu daughters. Instantly, the court erupted. They had heard what happened with Chang de Gongfu before, but no one could spare the attention to take care of it. But now that someone had censured them, naturally all these matters became unpardonable crimes. Even more so, there was no one in Jing who didn't know that Duan Wang was very much in love with his wife. What Chang de Gongfu had done, wouldn't that Duan Wang unhappy? Of course, there were those who looked at Rui Wang. Liang Shi's daughter was Rui Wang's Kia. If Rui Wang had any intentions of protecting them, it wouldn't be wise for them to throw stones while the other was down. After they watched for a few days, they found that Rui Wang showed no reaction to the matter. Then everyone understood. Rui Wang didn't have any desire to look after the matters of a Kie's paternal family. Since Rui Wang wasn't going to act, and Duan Wang didn't have any good feelings towards Chang de Gongfu, the hearts of the court officials were like a mirror. Within a few short days, the memorandums that censured Chang de Gongfu fell like snowflakes in front of the emperor. Numerous minor and major matters were revealed. Instantly, Chang de Gongfu became the mouse that everyone was yelling to kill, as if one look at them would dirty their eyes. When Chu Qingju heard that Chang de Gongfu was being censured, it was the third day since the matter had started. After she'd finished listening to Jin Zhon's report, she paused for a beat before inquiring, "Is there no one asking for mercy on behalf of Chang de Gongfu in court?" Jin Zhon shook her head. She took a look at Wang Fei's face and found that Wang Fei didn't seem to be worried at all for Chang de Gongfu. Before continuing, "Newbie heard that many are censuring the Duke and the Liang family. The emperor is very angry about the matter." Chu Qingju nodded, "I understand. Due to how much he disliked Chang de Gongfu, he definitely wouldn't ask for mercy for the Duke of Changde. The best case would be that he didn't try to step on them even more. But according to Hung's style of conduct, he wouldn't do it himself. No matter what, on the surface, the Duke of Changde was his father-in-law. If he came out personally, others might purposefully exaggerate it and it wouldn't be good for his reputation. Then again, the kind of person that Hung was, his best skill was doing everything in the dark. For him to be like He Qi or He Yuan and personally act, it would be very hard for him. Hung didn't want to help Chang de Gongfu. The intelligent people at royal court understood. And He Yuan didn't have any intentions of giving aid. Altogether, everyone understood that Chang de Gongfu was taking its last breaths. They said that not many gave coal in the snow, many dropped stones instead. People who censured Chang de Gongfu and the Liang family naturally popped out. Hearing people mention the crime of the Duke's marriage to a new wife before the bones of the first wife was cold, Chu Qingju felt elated. Chu Tianshi was very unfortunate to have met a man like the Duke of Changde. Additionally, Chu Tianshi's cause of death was suspicious, but her death was said to be illness by the Duke of Changde. Now that the people of Xiongqing Fu had this chance, would they give it up? As expected, Tianjin Ku sent up a memorandum on the exact day. The general meaning was that his Jejie's cause of death was suspicious. Liang Shi was married for only 8 months when she gave birth to twins. He was suspicious that the Duke of Changde killed his wife so that he could marry Liang Shi because she had been pregnant. Once the news came out, Jing became even noisier. That year, Liang Shi truly did give birth to the twins not even 8 months after marriage. The statement given out at the time was that she was carrying twins which caused an early birth. But thinking of it now, the matter was fishy. If nothing was wrong, why would the Duke of Changde be in such a hurry to marry her? Could he not even wait for the 100 days after his wife's passing? When the matter was exposed, those who had relationships with Chang de Gongfu and the Liang family all stopped interacting with them. The two families didn't even have anyone to ask for aid. As Chu Qingju heard the new situation each day about the Chu family at court, her mood became better and better. But who knew that on this day, when she had just finished listening to Jin Zhon tell her the gossip, one of the servants came to report that the Duke of Changde was requesting to meet her. The Duke of Changde? The memories in Chu Qingju's mind of the Duke of Changde were very apathetic, and there was even a hint of hate. She heard the Duke had come, and hesitated before standing to say, "Order the gatekeeper to let the Duke of Changde wait in the side hall of the Wang Fu." "Mistress, you are going to see the Duke?" Mu Jin looked worriedly at Chu Qingju, clearly worried on her behalf. "There's nothing to fear. Now, I am Wang Fei. Do I still have to fear that he will reprimand me for Liangshe?" Chu Qingju gave an icy smile. "Jin Zhon, help me dress." Jin Zhon quickly complied, and the group of Yahuan in the room joined in. Seeing the Yahuan bring in the different hairpins, jewelry, and the grand clothes, Chu Qingju picked an extravagantly lavish wide-sleeved Qingluan robe. In her memory, didn't the Duke of Changde like taking up the role of the father to reprimand the original owner of this body? Then she would let him know what it was like to be suppressed by authority. The Duke of Changde waited a long while outside the gate of Duan Wang Fu before someone came in to lead him inside the front gate. He followed the Taijian in front to the side hall of the Wang Fu. Liang Hong, who had been following behind, took out a pouch to shove in the hand of the Taijian leading the way, asking in a fawning tone, "This Ge, do you know when Wang Fei will be free?" He had accompanied his Yi Fu, to quite a few homes. Some straightforwardly didn't receive guests, some allowed them inside, but after filling their stomachs with tea, they still didn't see anyone. So he couldn't resist asking. The Taijian took the pouch and politely smiled as he replied, "This little Gongzi is too polite. This one is just a servant, and doesn't know anything about Wang Fei. You two can wait here, it should be only a while before you can meet Wang Fei." He made a bow before quickly leaving. Soon afterwards, servants came in to serve them tea and refreshments. Liang Hong restlessly sat on the carved pear tree chair. He looked at the servants of the Wang Fu standing in the room with their tastefully chosen attire and strangely felt that he couldn't breathe. Husband of mother's sister /N. Chapter 80. Don't dirty Ben Wang's place. The Duke of Changde held a teacup for 15 minutes. Looking at the silent door leading to the hall, it stirred up memories of the cold receptions he had received in other homes. He had endured it then. Now that he was at his daughter's place, he still had to sit on the bench. His face instantly darkened and he heavily slammed the teacup to one side, ranting, "I've raised such a good daughter. When her own father comes, she still acts like a Wang Fei. It was a waste raising her all those years." Liang Hong's heart jumped. He looked at the servants in the room who didn't react at all. He appeased, "Ifu, Duan Wang Fei has to take care of such a Wang Fu. She wouldn't be as free as she was before her marriage. We've only just arrived, don't be angry. If Duan Wang Fei heard what you said, she would be hurt. What does she have to be hurt about? After she'd married Wang Yi, she's never even seriously looked at her father. She came to my birthday banquet and threw a tantrum in front of the whole Fu. When the Duke of Changde thought about the contents in Tianjin Ku's censure memorandum, his face flushed. How is she my daughter? From the looks of it, she shouldn't be named Chu. She should have been named Tian." Liang Hong listened as his words became increasingly nasty and felt frantic inside. Right now, they had come to ask for aid, not to throw around their temper. How Ifu had treated Duan Wang Fei these years, he had personally seen it. If Wang Fei was willing to help, that would be a blessing from the heavens. But Ifu had to maintain the face of an elder. If Wang Fei saw, even if Duan Wang Fei's personality was gentle, she wouldn't stand for Ifu's attitude. He was anxious but didn't dare say more in case he provoked Ifu to get even nastier. He carefully looked at the servants in the room. These people were like statues. No matter how nasty Ifu's words were, they didn't even move an inch. It was as though he and Ifu didn't even exist. The conduct of these servants made Liang Hong feel the strictness of the protocol of the Wang Fu. "Duke Chu, are you angry because this Fu's tea and pastries aren't suited for your appetite?" Xiao Ganzi asked scornfully as he came in with a lower-ranked Taijian into the hall. He glared furiously at the Yahuan serving in the hall, admonishing, Useless beings. Remember what kind of place this is. You don't even know how to serve people. Go switch Duke Chu's tea. Liang Hong hurriedly interjected, this Gong is too courteous. The tea and pastries are all good. There's no need to trouble anyone. How could he not detect that this Taijian was pointing at the mulberry but swearing at the locust tree? But they had come here to seek aid. Furthermore, the pattern on the robe of this Taijian was different to that of a normal Taijian. His position in the fu wouldn't be low. The saying was that the gatekeeper of the Prime Minister's gate was a fourth-pin official. How could he even dare to offend the Taijian who had some status in the Wang Fu? Xiao Ganzi turned to look at the young person in front of him. He mockingly raised his hands in a fist to Liang Hong as he said, this Gongzi must be Duke Chu's son. This one greets you too. I don't dare receive Gong's greeting. This student is Liang Hong, an Ifu's nephew. Liang Hong returned a bow and tried to hand a pouch to Xiao Ganzi. Liang Gongzi doesn't have to be this courteous. This one is insignificant and doesn't dare to take Gongzi's gift. Xiao Ganshi unhesitatingly pushed aside Liang Hong's pouch. Please sit, our Wang Fei will be here shortly. Honger, sit down. Today, I'm going to see when this good daughter of mine will arrive. I've waited this long and she's just sent a Taijian to brush us off. Once she became a Wang Fei, her heirs have become arrogant enough that she won't even attend to her own father. The Duke of Changde impatiently looked at Xiao Ganzi and Liang Hong, his actions and tone of voice showing just how much he looked down upon this Taijian named Xiao Ganzi. Xiao Ganzi smiled instead of getting angry. He came forward and bowed, saying, Duke Chu, don't be furious. Our Wang Fei isn't as idle as Chu San Xiajie. Every day, she has to manage the fu and all the matters of the different estates. That's awfully busy work. After hearing that the Duke had come today, she went to dress and groom herself in a rush to see you. One can see just how much she respects you. Upon hearing this, Liang Hong's heart became even more bitter. What was not as idle as Chu San Xiajie? On the inside, he blamed Ifu for his fiery personality and improper manner of speech. He also was angry at Chu Qingju for not respecting them. But he also knew that the current circumstances were disadvantageous to them. If Ifu kept acting like this, when Du and Wang found out, the matter would be even more difficult to diffuse. The Duke of Changde snorted icily. If she respects me, why would she let me wait for so long? Just as he'd finished speaking, the half-closed door to the hall was suddenly pushed open. The hall was instantly saturated with light. The Duke of Changde and Liang Hong turned to look and saw Chu Qingju wearing a red floor-length dress as she stood expressionless at the doorway. Behind her were more than 10 Yahuan and Taijian. Without even speaking, they made others feel intimidated. Chu Qingju looked indifferently at the Duke of Changde who sat still on the chair. She held Mu Jin's hand as she walked into the room. Once she'd sat on the center seat, she then lifted her chin slightly to look at the standing Liang Hong and the still-seated Duke of Changde. This was the first time that Liang Hong saw the married Chu Qingju. Last time, he had heard that she came to Ifu's birthday but he didn't have the chance to see her. Seeing her today, he finally understood what was called the world turned upside down. The woman in front of him wearing the majestic clothes hadn't changed in appearance but he felt that something was different. He began to feel intimidated now that he was standing in front of her. Barely suppressing the fear inside, after Chu Qingju sat down, Liang Hong came forward to raise his hands in a greeting. This student Liang Hong greets Du and Wang Fei. Chu Qingju barely glanced at him. She took a sip of the tea that was on the table, then frowned and criticized. Today's tea is too bitter. Change it. Yes, Mu Jin bowed to take the teacup. She turned to give it to the second-rank Yahuan behind her. Very quickly, a Yahuan handed a new cup to her. She turned again to place it on the table beside Chu Qingju. Liang Hong obediently bent his body as he stood, too afraid to even move. Liang Gongzi doesn't have to be so courteous. Please sit. Chu Qingju raised the teacup once again. She raised her eyelids slightly to look at the Duke of Changde. Why have the two of you come today? You are a Wang Fei now. Don't you know what has happened to your paternal family? The Duke of Changde accused in a heavy voice. Or is it that you don't even care about your paternal family at all?
Oh.
Chu Qingju raised an eyebrow. Are you talking about how Liang Shi took advantage of the status of Changde Gongfu to let the Liang family abuse the people of Lancheng County, or that you took a new wife before your first wife's bones had even cooled, or how exactly did Ben Wangfei's mother die? She spoke slowly, her tone was very calm, but it made Liang Hong, who had been sitting restlessly, feel a chill on his back. He looked at how Duan Wangfei's red-nailed hand slowly caressed the teacup. The strings in his brain were so tight that they almost broke. He was now regretting the fact that he'd accompanied Yifu to Duan Wangfu. Is this the attitude that you, as a daughter, should have towards your father? The Duke of Changde was a bit shaken, but seeing that even the daughter who had once been so submissive to him dare talk like that to him, the anger inside erupted. He stood and pointed at Chu Qingju, cursing, "If I knew that this would happen, in the beginning, I would have choked you to death and not let you live to anger me today." Upon hearing this, Chu Qingju gave a sweet smile to the Duke of Changde. Then she threw the teacup in her hand onto the ground. The expensive government kill teacup instantly shattered into pieces, the crisp sounds frightening the Duke of Changde, who shrank back in response. She spread out her hand and looked at her nails, which had been dyed red. She looked at the Duke of Changde from the corner of her eye. "Why aren't you cursing? Weren't you so happy cursing right now?" The Duke of Changde unconsciously took a step back. He opened his mouth but found his throat had turned wooden and couldn't say a word. "I'm the kind of person that has a bad habit. That is, I hold grudges." Chu Qingju lowered her hand and smoothed her dress. From Mu Jin's hand, she took another teacup. She smiled cheerfully as she spoke. "Liang Gongzi, in all those years that you've lived at Changde Gongfu, come say how the Fu has treated me." Liang Hong's face was full of sweat, but he couldn't say a word. He might be a member of the Liang family, but he also knew that Yimu had not treated Duan Wangfei well before her marriage. Now that Duan Wangfei was asking him, he couldn't say well, but couldn't say not well, and could only remain silent. Take a look, even the people of the Liang family can't say a word. It can be seen just how well Changde Gongfu treated me. Chu Qingju sneered, "Coming here today, were you hoping that I could persuade Wang Yi to help Changde Gongfu?" She saw the Duke of Changde nod his head and the smile on her face became even more visible. "But why?" The Duke of Changde's tone warmed greatly. He carefully looked at the broken teacup on the ground. "I know that the Fu had been lacking in some aspects with the way they treated you, but no matter what, it's your paternal home. If a scandal came out of your paternal home, you would be dishonored as well. Would Duan Wang still regard you well? If He Heng treated her like He Yuan treated Qin Bailu, then this matter would have really impacted her. But right now in Jing, who didn't know that Duan Wangfei wasn't close to Changde Gongfu? Who didn't know that Duan Wang and Duan Wangfei were deeply in love?" Thinking about it, Chu Qingju suddenly wondered what He Heng was after, since he treated her so well. The Tian family. But the Tian family were only ever loyal to the emperor, that was the mantra passed down from their ancestors. Would they even support He Heng just because she married him? He Heng wouldn't neglect her because of the Tian family. When he had just married the original, he kept her in good food and comfort but wasn't even close to her. The original's personality had been weak. Other than what Tian Luosha had taught her in the rare occasions they had met, there were no other elders to teach her the dark secrets of the Huyuan or how to treat marital relations. That's why after her marriage, the Shiqie were able to sneak in and cause her to lose her life. The tragedy that was the life of the original had all come from the Duke of Changde. It was amazing that he was still shameless enough to come here to yell and holler. The fact that this kind of man could live until now, it was really by the virtues of his ancestors. The Duke of Changde saw Chu Qingju's head had lowered in thought and assumed that what he said had moved her. He continued, "Don't believe what the Tian family said. You have to know that we are of one family. Can you believe what outsiders say?" Chu Qingju, who was so disgusted by his words that broke her train of thought, sarcastically responded, "Even outsiders were willing to add so much to my dowry when I married, but why was it that this family of mine wasn't willing? It's all shameless and dishonorable." Chu Qingju heard the words and suddenly lifted her head to look. She saw He Heng with a dark face come striding in from outside. This time, the Duke of Changde didn't dare remain seated. He and Liang Hong obediently performed a greeting and stood in the center of the hall, but they didn't dare to look at He Heng's angry visage. When He Hung heard the Duke of Changde say that he would not regard Chu Qingju the same because of Changde Gongfu scandals, the fire in his heart couldn't be suppressed any longer. He looked at the broken teacup on the floor and walked to sit next to Chu Qingju. He patted her head as he said, "Anger harms the body, there's me for all matters." He glanced at the Duke of Changde, furrowing his brows as he asked, "Duke Chu, you weren't satisfied with making your wife die from anger, so you came here today to Ben Wang's place to show off your might. Who gave you the guts?" "Wang Yi, please understand that this lower official only said it out of anger." The Duke of Changde wasn't sure if Duan Wang had heard what he had said before. He raised his hands and cautiously responded, "The matter of my wife, it is purely Tianjin Ku slandering this lower official. Wang Yi cannot trust that person." "Ha," He Hung raised an eyebrow as he looked at the Duke of Changde, "that there's a person who is as shameless as the Duke in this world. It has really broadened Ben Wang's knowledge." "Wang Yi." The Duke of Changde didn't think that Duan Wang would speak so mercilessly and couldn't help but look at Chu Qingju. "Someone come and see off the guest." He Hung smiled icily and snorted with disdain, "Don't dirty Ben Wang's place." Chu Qingju looked at He Hung's state and couldn't help but burst into laughter. Some rough labor Taijian saw off the Duke of Changde and Liang Hong. Xiao Ganzi stood at the gate and from high up, looked down at the two people at the bottom of the stairs. He slowly drawled to the people beside him, "In the future, clean your eyes when you receive a card. Don't accept just anyone. Otherwise, some will think that they are worth something and yell and shriek at Wang Yi and Wang Fei. If one didn't know better, they'd think that he was the Wang Yi." He clapped his hand, and in front of the two, he closed the gate to the Wang Fu. Liang Hong looked at the tightly shut gate of the Wang Fu. He suddenly realized that from beginning to end, Duan Wang Fei hadn't called Ifu father once. He looked at the man whose face was full of discontent and anger, and cold sweat formed on his palms. If Imu had treated Duan Wang Fei better in the beginning, maybe it wouldn't be like this. This time, if Biao Mai couldn't persuade His Highness Rui Wang, he was afraid the Liang family would be finished. Chapter 81 Inviting Humiliation. The side hall was very quiet. Chu Qingju sat on the chair as she looked at the shattered cup on the floor, her expression dark. He Hung indicated for the servants to sweep away the broken shards of porcelain. He rarely saw such a dazed expression on Chu Qingju's face. But he didn't want to see it anymore, so he couldn't resist going up to her and deliberately rubbed her face, smiling as he teased, "What, you don't have any more energy after that outburst?" Chu Qingju raised her head to look at the mirth on his face. She looked seriously into his eyes and from his purposely relaxed expression, she found the concern that was hidden behind his smile. She forced a smile. "I have just discovered that he's not worthy of my mother and I." She wasn't clear as to why the Tian family had married their daughter off to the Chu family, but she'd heard that it was due to a promise made by the previous generation. These parents, because of their own feelings, didn't care for their children's desires and carelessly gave them away in a marriage. They glorified the marriage of their children as a means of proving their friendship with each other. Or did they believe that because the elders were friends, their children would be happily married and the husband wouldn't neglect the wife? The reality was always harsher than the ideal. Chu Tianshi didn't receive gentle treatment from the Duke of Changde just because their elders had been friends. Did the old Marquis of Xiongqing, who hadn't passed away at that time, ever regret it? She wasn't a person from ancient times, so she couldn't understand their mentality. But if she had children in the future, she would be reluctant to treat them that way. "I know," He Hung gathered the person into his arms, quietly promising, "The people who had bullied you in the past, I will remember them for you. We will live for a long time, so don't harm your body for these people. We will find an opportunity for you to bully them back." Chu Qingju sat on the chair as she put her head into He Hung's lap. She listened to the man holding her tell how she could bully the people who once bullied her. That bit of grief in her heart had already disappeared without a trace. She turned to wrap an arm around him, laughing as she rubbed her head on his waist. The servants all cautiously lowered their heads, not daring to look at the two Zhuzi. But a smile was on the mouths of Mu Jin and the others. It seemed that no matter how Changde Gongfu was, Wang Yi wouldn't lessen his affections for Wang Fei. These days, all the servants of Rui Wang Fu were trembling with fear. It was an open secret in the Fu, which they didn't dare to spread outside, that Wang Yi and Wang Fei weren't on good terms. The fact that Wang Fei extremely disliked Chu Si-Fei of Shi Si Yuan was something that everyone knew. But because Chu Si-Fei was favored by Wang Yi, no servant dared to offend Chu Si-Fei. In the days after the details of Chang de Gong Fu's circumstances leaked, there was more idle talk among the servants. Even though they didn't dare to openly mention it in front of Chu Yusu could still detect that the eyes of the servants as they looked at her weren't right. As she faced the curious or disdainful stares of the servants, she could only bitterly endure and not show even a hint of discontent. Chu Si-Fei, Wang Fei asks to meet you. A Taijian came in and bowed to Chu Yusu nonchalantly. He said in a neutral tone. Wang Fei said that if Chu Si-Fei doesn't have the time, it's fine not to go, but then Wang Fei will reject the card of the Duchess of Changde. It must have been an inconvenience for Gong Gong to pass on the news. I will go immediately. Chu Yusu didn't seem to notice the slight the Taijian gave her, smiling as she stood from the chair. She also let Yarrow shove a pouch to the Taijian. It wasn't that she wished to endure it, but this Taijian in front of her was most favored by Wang Fei. She was just a shiqie, so she didn't dare offend him. After the Taijian left, the smile on Chu Yusu's face completely disappeared as she ordered, Yaroshi, help me dress. By now, Chang de Gong Fu must be a mess. She didn't even need to guess to know that their so-called friends and relatives were hiding far away. Qin Bailu disdainfully looked at the card in her hand and carelessly threw it to one side. This Chang de Gong Fu is such a joke that they actually came begging to our Fu. Are you Hua, who was standing behind her, inquired in a small voice. Wang Fei, if that's the case, why would you allow Chu Shi to see her paternal family? Wasn't that giving Chu Shi an opportunity? Why not let her see? Qin Bailu smiled coldly. I want her to see if Wang Yi would really aid the Chu and Liang families for her. Yu Huan looked at Wang Fei's icy stare and didn't speak any longer. By now, Wang Fei and Wang Yi were at the stage where they had nothing to say to each other. Wang Fei's hatred towards Chu Shi became more and more evident. Now that the situation had turned out like this, unless Chu Shi was spurned by Wang Yi, there was no other way for it to end. A short while later, Qin Bailu saw Chu Yusu dressed in a slightly old, plain dress as she came in. She looked at this woman who respectfully bowed to her in greeting, a hint of mirth appearing on her lips. The Duchess of Changde asks to see you. I'm not a cruel person, so I will allow your mother and you to see each other at Shi Si Yuan. What does Chu Si-Fei think? Newbie thanks Wang Fei. Chu Yusu almost bent in half. She looked at the disdain in Qin Bailu's gaze and gritted her teeth as she turned and walked out of the gate of Zhengyuan. Qin Bailu didn't really sympathize with her. She wanted to see her begging. The more Chu Yusu's family situation worsened, the more happier Qin Bailu became. Taking Yaroshi's hand to support her as she returned to Shi Si Yuan, she sat for a long time before a servant led Liangsha into the door. Chu Yusu looked at her mother, whose complexion had become more fragile, and stood to welcome Liangsha. Sua, Liangsha looked at her daughter, her tears pouring before she even spoke. Our Fu is not in a very good situation. Chu Yusu supported her in sitting down and comforted her. Mother, don't cry. First, tell me what's happening outside. Now that she was in the Huyuan of the Wang Fu, she didn't hear much news. She only knew that there were many people at court who were censuring her paternal family but didn't know much else. Liangsha wiped away her tears as she gave a complete narration of the condition of her home. When she mentioned that Chu Qingju wasn't willing to help, her voice held hatred. If I had known that damned Yatu would one day act like this, I wouldn't have left her alive in the beginning. After hearing this, Chu Yusu gave a bitter smile. She said helplessly, Mother, now that it's like this, it's useless to complain. Right now, no one is willing to help us. Not even the heavens or the earth would respond. Even your Didi was persuaded to leave the Eastern Mountain Academy. I had originally planned for him to attend the autumn examinations. Now that it's like this, how could your Didi get a good score? As she thought of her son, Liangsha's expression became even uglier. The most horrid is the Tian family. They had to pull out the matter from 10 years ago. Chu Yusu felt that it wouldn't end very well this time, but looking at her mother's face, she couldn't say it. Sua, you are this Wang Fu Si Fei. Why don't you beg Rui Wang? Rui Wang is most favored by the emperor. If Rui Wang could say a few words on behalf of our family, it would be more useful than anything else. Liangsha tightened her grip on Chu Yusu's hand. Just help our Fu in thinking of some more solutions. Her hand hurt from being gripped so tightly. Chu Yusu felt bitter inside. She was only a shiqie, she had no qualifications to ask Wang Yi to do something for her. But once faced her mother's pleas, she could only nod and decide, I'll go beg Wang Yi. If Wang Yi doesn't agree, Rui Wang will most certainly agree. The fear on Liangsha's face halved. She looked at the beautiful face of her daughter and stated confidently, I've even heard it outside. Rui Wang likes you very much. If you begged, why wouldn't he agree? Likes. Thinking of Wang Yi's attitude towards her these days, Chu Yusu could only squeeze out a small smile and didn't say a word. Mother and daughter didn't manage to speak for much longer before the steward came in to rush them out. Liangsha assumed that it was Wang Fei who got jealous of her daughter and left unwillingly. As she came out of Rui Wang Fu's front gate, Liangsha thought with some smugness, so what if Chu Qingju was a Wang Fei? She wasn't willing to help her Laro Yi. In the end, didn't the hopes of the Fu lie with the daughter she gave birth to? The moonlight was like frost. Qin Bai Lu looked at the bright moon outside and asked Are Yu Hua in a mirthless voice. Wang Yi went to Shi Si Yuan? Are Yu Hua nodded. Just now, someone saw Wang Yi heading that way. Qin Bai Lu unexpectedly laughed out loud. It was carefree yet full of sorrow. The laugh grew louder and dissipated into the night. He Yuan released his hand which had been holding Chu Yu's chin and allowed her to tilt the cup for him to drink wine. He mockingly put his hand at the softness of her chest. Why is Beauty so enthusiastic today? Is there something she wants to ask for? Chu Yusu's heart jumped. She then gave an enchanting smile and said, What is Wang Yi saying? Kie sincerely wants to serve you. Really? He Yuan examined her closely. Just when the smile on her face was going to break, he said, Such a pity. Originally, Ben Wang was thinking that if you had something to ask, Ben Wang would try to help. Since you don't have anything, a minute of the spring night is worth 1,000 gold, so we should live in the present. Sliding into the man's arms, Chu Yusu reached out to trace He Yuan's chest. Kie does have a small matter. Wang Yi's eyes are keen to have found me out. Oh. He Yuan held one arm around her, the other hand holding a wine cup as he asked, What matter does Beauty have? Kie wanted to ask about Chang de Gong Fu. He Yuan pushed the person in his arms away, not caring that she had fallen to the floor. He Yuan placed the wine cup on the table and sneered, Ben Wang didn't think that you would be shameless enough to mention this matter. Wang Yi, Chu Yusu's expression changed. She knelt in front of He Yuan, reaching out to hug his leg as she pleaded, Wang Yi, please save Kie's paternal family. Kie from beginning to end, Ben Wang had never even looked at Chang de Gong Fu. He Yuan sneered and kicked her aside. He slowly stood, if it wasn't for finding your eyes somewhat attractive, Ben Wang wouldn't have taken you into the Fu. Just a Kie, did you really think that you are Ben Wang's heart? He didn't even look at the woman he had kicked, now sprawled on the floor. He adjusted his clothes, so disappointing. It seems that Qing Liu of Dong Yuan is still more tactful. Chu Yusu covered the chest that had been kicked and struggled to sit up. She only looked at He Yuan's back as he unhesitatingly left. The silver moonlight illuminated his shoulders, and for no discernible reason, made her feel colder. Chapter 82. The curtain drops on Chu and Liang. In the end, the Chu family didn't manage to find anyone to help them. Even though they couldn't examine what had happened 16 years ago, the Tai, who had been requested by Tian Shi after she had given birth to a daughter, was still alive. He had taken the pulse of Chu Tian Shi quite a few times. The pulse had been very steady with no hint of illness. However, the final outcome was that by the end of the month, Chu Tian Shi had passed away due to illness. He was inwardly suspicious, so he clearly remembered, even after all these years, that he had been the first person to take Chu Tian Shi's pulse at that time. The testimony of this Tai didn't prove that Chu Tian Shi was killed by Chang de Gong Fu, but once combined with the others' facts, soon after Chu Tian Shi's death, the Duke of Changde had been in a rush to welcome the new wife, Liangsha, the dragon and phoenix twins who Liangsha had given birth to not even 8 full months after entering the Fu. All these series of coincidences was enough to prove that Chu Tianxi's death wasn't accidental but deliberate. Once the proof was revealed, it shocked the entire court. If a man was lustful, it meant that his morals were deficient, but it wasn't enough to make others dislike him. But to harm his wife for a woman on the outside, that was being an animal in clothing, a person that everyone could beat up. Qingde Emperor had originally heard that Duan Wangfei was estranged from her birth father. Hence, he had been slightly dissatisfied with Duan Wangfei. Since the marriage had been decreed by him, he couldn't act on it. But once this matter came out, and Qingde Emperor looked at the memorandums which described how Changde Gongfu had abused the eldest Di daughter and Shu daughters, he felt that his second Erxi didn't have an easy life. He couldn't help but say to Jing Guifei, who had been grinding ink for him, originally, Zhen had thought that this was a woman who didn't respect her parents. I didn't think that she had such a tragic past. It was fortunate that official Tian cares for his relatives. Otherwise, our 11 might have been someone else. Jing Guifei didn't look at the memorandums and only responded, Emperor, you don't even know that Hungus' wife is extremely filial. Normally, when she receives something interesting, she would impatiently deliver it to Kie. In the beginning, Kie thought she was too childish, but only now does Kie know that this child most likely thinks of Kie as her own mother, so she would think of Kie at every turn. The rims of her eyes reddened, such a good child, but Changde Gongfu abused her. It really is too cruel. Qingde Emperor was extremely moved by what Jing Guifei said. He reached out to pat her hand and comforted her. Now you are her popo, that makes you her mother. She remembers beloved Fei. One is that she is filial, the second is that you are close to her. It isn't just that she is a good 11, you are also a good popo, which made the two of you become more intimate. Jing Guifei was so comforted that she smiled through her tears. At this time, a Taijian from the outside reported that Shu Gaif was asking for an audience. Jing Guifei had a conflicted expression on her face as she said, since Mai has something to ask Emperor, then Kie will retreat. There's no need. Qingde Emperor reached out to pull Jing Guifei closer, not allowing her to leave. He turned his head to look at the Taijian. Tell Shu Guifei that Zhen has no time and won't see her. Emperor. Before Jing Guifei could finish, she was interrupted by Qingde Emperor. Beloved Fei, come see how this drawing is. Qingde Emperor rolled open a drawing, and started to admire it with Jing Guifei. Jing Guifei smiled as she went forward a few steps. After closely examining it, she nodded and praised. This drawing has both mountains and water, the sky and earth are vast. Not even taking into account how good the artist's skill is, one can see the artist has a generous personality. Whoever drew this, if Emperor can hire such a person to enter politics and work, he will become a pillar of the country. What pillar of the country? This was just a product of Zhen's leisure time. Qingde Emperor contentedly put his hands behind his back. Seeing the shock and awe on Jing Guifei's face, he said happily, how about Zhen teach you how to draw? Jing Guifei naturally went with the flow and allowed Qingde Emperor to enclose her hand and start drawing. Watching as a peony formed under the brush, Jing Guifei glanced outside at the steadily darkening sky, an indiscernible hint of mirth at the corner of her lips. Shu Guifei looked at the tightly closed gate to the palace hall and unwillingly turned to slowly leave. What was not having the time? How could that whore Weisha accompany the emperor? 20-something years ago, Weisha didn't manage to enchant the emperor, so how could Weisha, 20-something years later, manage to captivate the emperor? This kind of matter, she wouldn't believe it, and no one who heard it would believe it either. Because the matter was connected to the mystery of Chu Tianxi's death, along with the series of events that had occurred at Changde Gongfu, Qingde Emperor was so angry that he wanted to execute the Duke of Changde. In the end, because he had remembered that the Duke of Changde had the grace of giving birth and raising Duan Wangfei, he exempted his death sentence. Instead, he took away the Chu clan's title, and demoted the family of Changde Gongfu to a Shumin. The Duke of Changde Gongfu was imprisoned in jail. Those not in jail were thrown out of Changde Gongfu. As for the small family that was the Liang family, Qingde Emperor didn't have to waste much energy. He just sealed the Liang Fu and erased the scholarly honor of Liang Hong, and decreed that the next 3 generations of Chu and Liang family could not attend the examinations. The Chu family who had caused so much fuss in Jing City fell down just like that. Among the people, there were even ones who had started to use Chang de Gong Fu as the basis for many plays. A fickle man who killed his wife to marry again. A cruel father and stepmother who abused the previous wife's daughter. And how the first wife's daughter endured such humiliations and in the end, married an ideal husband. No matter how much the story had changed, the Duke of Changde and Liang Shi were eternally known as the most malicious villains, and Chu Qingju was the abused little white cabbage. After she had finished reading how she had married an ideal husband and the aggressive and contemptible paternal family story, Chu Qingju laughed so much that she cried. As expected, the plays were based on reality but larger than life. When did she ride a 12-person gold sedan? When did Wang Yi, full of rage, drag everyone of the Gong Fu out to be beaten? Those points were too drastic. Mu Jing saw Wang Fei crying from laughter as she read the story and came forward to attentively help rub her stomach. She smiled as she commented, "Wang Fei, don't choke." Newbie heard another version before. How about Wang Fei take a listen? Tell me. Chu Qingju took a drink of tea and asked in interest. After Mu Jin finished narrating, Chu Qingju felt that the creativity of the ancient people was extremely strong. The main idea of the story was that she, the little white cabbage, endured the snow in the middle of winter to buy red bean buns for Liang Shi. She struggled in her journey in the midst of the harsh winds, wearing very little, and encountered Duan Wang on a white horse. The two of them fell in love at first glance. In the end, a romance that moved the heavens was written. Did the logic of this story get eaten by the author? Liang Shi would eat red bean buns in the winter and not sparrow's nest. And in that kind of weather, who would be selling buns? Even if people were selling, who would go buy them? The most strange was that in such a snowstorm, He Hung wouldn't sit in a sedan or carriage outside but would masochistically ride a horse. Just as Chu Qingju was going to laugh herself silly, Ming He unexpectedly came over. He said that Wang Yi wanted to take her out of the Fu. Chu Qingju didn't know what it was for, but seeing Ming He's state, it was an emergency. She glanced at her attire to see if anything was wrong and didn't change before following Ming He out. When she got on the Wang Fu's carriage, Chu Qingju saw He Hung was already sitting inside. She asked with some confusion, "Wang Yi, where are we going?" "The play has to go on till the end. If you don't get to see the conclusion, there's no meaning." He Hung smiled and held her hand. He ordered the driver outside, to Chang de Gong Fu. Chu Qingju looked in surprise at He Hung. After the carriage started moving, she asked, "Why does Wang Yi want to take me there?" "Today is the day that everyone of Chang de Gong Fu is being evicted completely. That place was where you used to live. Before the Fu is sealed, I'll get you to check if there is anything wrong," He Hung cheerfully responded. "I know that Qingju is a person who remembers the old times." Hearing He Hung give such a dignified reason for going to spectate, Chu Qingju smiled and followed. "Wang Yi is right, I am one who remembers the old times." The saying, "the clothes should be new, the people should be of the past," had its own logic. When the carriage made its way to the front door of Chang de Gong Fu, there was a great mess at the gate. Loud sobbing and pleading made the entire place sound like the market. Ming He came up to pull the curtain at the front of the carriage slightly open, allowing the two Zhuzi inside to have a perfect view of the great play occurring outside the Fu. The uniformed imperial guards were forcefully escorting some people who didn't want to leave. On the ground were dropped luggage and clothes. There were many servants who had left with their heads down. Seeing Duan Wang Fu's carriage, they carefully came forward to bow before hurriedly leaving. Chu Qingju watched apathetically as Chu Xiajie supported Chu Lao Tai Tai out the front gate. Behind the two was Liang Shi, her face full of panic. Chu Wangji was trailing Liang Shi, his crestfallen attitude like a duck plucked of its feathers. The family stood at the gate, watching as the servants who had once served them all leave. Gradually, the crowd grew smaller and smaller, and then there was silence. Chu Lao Tai Tai watched as the plaque, on which Chang de Gong Fu was written, got taken down and smashed onto the ground. Then continued watching as the crimson-red doors of the gate got sealed with papers from the government. A long time later, she sighed, "Karma, karma." She pointed at Liang Shi who was wiping her tears to rant, "That year, if it wasn't for taking this person of bad luck into the Fu, would my Chu family be like this? By now, Liang Shi wouldn't listen to what Chu Laro Tai Tai said. She instantly retorted, Laro Tai Tai might have forgotten that it was Laro Yi who had married Erxi into the Fu. Laro Tai Tai, rather than blame me, blame Laro Yi. You, Chu Laro Tai Tai was so angry that she staggered. It was only because of Chu Hui Shui's support that she barely managed to not fall down. Did the Liang family teach you to not respect your elders like this? There's not even a Liang family now. Wasn't it impacted by your Chu family? Liang Shi felt that her paternal family had been indirectly affected by the Chu family. She instantly shrieked, why is Laro Tai Tai turning around to blame our Liang family? Mother, don't speak any more. Chu Wangji heard Liang Shi's words becoming nastier and couldn't help wading in, now that our family is like this. What are you fighting over? I will disturb everyone. This is our Wang Fei's gift to everyone, please receive it. Chu Wangji heard that this voice didn't belong to a normal man and turned around. He saw a Taijian wearing a blue robe standing behind them, a pouch of silver in his hand. He couldn't resist looking behind the Taijian and saw a magnificent carriage parked not too far away. Inside the carriage was Duan Wang and Da Jie sitting together. Because of the distance, he couldn't distinguish the expression on the two's faces. But in this instant, he felt that he was entirely mired in an awkward and embarrassed state. Chapter 83 The oncoming wind and rain. Sometimes, the most painful time wasn't when you had lost everything. It was when you had lost everything and the person who had been suppressed by you was standing in great circumstances right in front of you. Chu Wangji looked at the silver in the hands of the Taijian standing in front of him. He might have been a bit of a wastrel, but even he knew that the amount of silver in the pouch wasn't insignificant. It was enough for a normal family to live on for a few decades without doing anything. But even though he didn't have anything at present, he still didn't want to receive that pouch of silver. Liang Shi, who had been wiping away her tears, snatched the silver from Minghe's hands and threw it ferociously on the ground. She pointed at Chu Qingju in the carriage, ranting, we don't need you coming here at this time to falsely give aid. The snowy white silver rolled out from the cotton pouch, scattering to the ground. Under the sunlight, it was even more blinding. The spectators in the street saw the scene and started gossiping amongst themselves. Chu Hui Shui supported her grandmother. Listening to the mocking laughter of the spectators targeted at Chang de Gongfu, she embarrassedly lowered her head and saw an ingot of silver that had rolled to her feet. For some reason, she suddenly thought of a certain day 3 years ago when Tai Tai had thrown a teacup in the exact same manner at Da Jie's feet. That cup of tea had been very hot. It had been the beginning of spring, yet she was able to see the white steam as the tea splashed onto Da Jie's feet. But at that time, Da Jie always kept her head down, so she wasn't able to see the expression on Da Jie's face. For some reason, she suddenly felt somewhat elated. Liang Shi, well off for more than a decade, Liang Shi, who had abused her mother, finally met today's outcome. As she thought some more, a smile appeared on Chu Hui Shui's face and she bent down to pick up the silver at her feet. She blew away the dust on the silver and put it in a pouch at her waist. Liang Shi didn't notice her actions. However, Chu Laro Tai Tai saw but didn't say a word. She wasn't intelligent, but she was able to see the situation more clearly than Liang Shi, so she wouldn't do anything that would provide more food for gossip. Liang Shi had never thought that there would be a day when her and Chu Qingju's positions would be switched. That Ya-Tu in her memory, who had always been submissive, is now become high up in the sky and she has now become a base Shumin. She was both hateful and unsatisfied, so she placed the source of the misfortunes onto Chu Qingju, who was sitting in the carriage. Chu Qingju calmly looked at Liang Shi. This woman did have some beauty, but only just some. She couldn't understand how the Duke of Changde was so captivated by her that he would do something as crazy as killing his wife. A man that heartless, did he really know what was love? After seeing Liang Shi lose her composure and started to curse, Chu Qingju felt the discontent, deep inside her heart, gradually dissipate. She covered her chest, as though she could see the lonely and helpless little girl enduring the days and nights in Changde Gongfu, saw her marry into the Wang Fu, saw her resist the man's approaches, saw her silently lie down on the carved bed and calmly close her eyes. He Heng noticed that Chu Qingju's expression wasn't right and gently grasped her hand. Qingju, what's wrong with you? Chu Qingju's gaze met his and she suddenly smiled. She shook her head, answering, "Nothing." She moved her gaze back towards Liang Shi, and bent to get out of the carriage. She gave her hand to Mu Jin, who had been standing by the side of the carriage, and stepped on a wooden stool as she got off the carriage. Step by step, she walked to stand in front of Liang Shi, whose face was distorted, and in a very small voice, she said, "If you keep making a fuss like this, that's not accumulating virtue for your children. Didn't anyone tell you that I hold grudges?" Liang Shi was so angry that she wanted to scream. But when she saw the smile on Chu Qingju's face, she couldn't say a word. She turned to look at her son, and thought about her daughter who was a Ce Fei in Rui Wang Fu. She gritted her teeth. "What do you want to do?" "Take a guess." Chu Qingju made a long exhale and took a few steps back. "No matter what, you've taken care of me for so many years. I just need to reminisce on the past to feel overwhelmed and beside myself." "You slut." Liang Shi reached out to try to scratch Chu Qingju's face but was pushed aside by Ming his hand. He said in a loud voice, "Outrageous. Wang Fei was thinking of Chu Laotai's age and especially came here to give some silver to make your days easier. It's fine if you aren't grateful, but you want to harm Wang Fei, you are too evil." The crowd of spectators saw the scene and extrapolated on how Duan Wang Fei, who had been abused in Changde Gongfu, was still sympathetic of Chu Laotaitai due to her advancing age and made a trip just to give some silver. The result was that the evil stepmother cursed her when she saw her without a hint of regret. It did seem as though this Liang Shi was even more malicious than what was rumored. They didn't understand how the kind and filial Duan Wang Fei escaped her evil clutches. Chu Qingju looked very hurt at Liang Shi, who was being supported by Chu Wangji. She said helplessly, "Since you don't welcome me, I won't ever appear in front of you in the future." She made a bow in the direction of Chu Laotaitai. "Everyone, take care." When she'd finished speaking, Chu Qingju looked very wan and she held Mu Jin's hand as they went back to the carriage. When the curtain to the carriage was put down, the loss on her face instantly disappears. She really just loved watching Liang Shi live out her days in fear. Maybe what she should be worried about was just how she, as Duan Wang Fei, would harm her children. Maybe she would live every day in her hatred. But these issues weren't important anymore. "Let's return." He Heng smiled slightly as he held her hand. Chu Qingju smiled and nodded, "Return." The people of Duan Wang Fu left, and so did the spectators. Before the Chu family could react, several ruffians and gangsters suddenly ran over and picked up the silver from the ground and disappeared. Chu Wangji looked at the scattering ruffians and turned his head to look at his family. For an instant, he felt that there was no place in this great big world for them. "Let's go." Chu Laotaitai banged her walking stick and glanced icily at Liang Shi. "What are you standing here for? This place isn't the Chu family's anymore." She started walking away, supported by Chu Hui Shui. Liang Shi looked at her son and in the end, she could only helplessly follow Laotaitai. But in every street she passed by, there were many people pointing at her. She even saw some spitting behind her. She looked blankly at these people. She finally understood. She wasn't a duchess anymore. There weren't any more riches and honors. She didn't have anything. And the daughter left behind by that whore was going to plot against her. Finished, all finished. The spring gradually passed and the hotness of the summer slowly came. By this time, Chu Qingju didn't like to go out. Most of the time, she was hiding in the cooled room, wearing a silk dress as she waved a fan and listened to Jin Zhon and Huang Yang tell her the gossip in Jing City. A few days earlier, something unexpected happened to Chu Qingju. Chu Hui Shui had been married to a Xiuzai. This Xiuzai had no parents but he had land and servants. Even more unexpected, this Xiuzai's mother had once been Chu Hui Shui's mother's good friend. After the Xiuzai married her, he didn't slight her because of Changde Gongfu and the two had a good relationship. This event was probably the most fairy-tale-like incident since Chu Qingju came to this time. This incident also proved that sometimes, real life was more unexpected than stories. After she was informed of the matter, she let Xiao Ganzi send some appropriate celebratory gifts to Chu Hui Shui as well as the questions from past examinations and the best answers. It counted as her good wishes to the couple. Chu Hui-shue didn't start interacting with Chu Qingju greatly because of the presents. She solemnly wrote a letter of appreciation and let a servant deliver some fresh produce as well as some of her own embroidery. After that, she went on to live her own life. Wang Fei, this is a lily silver tree ear fungus Buddha fruit soup which has just been made by the servants. Drink some to reduce the heat. Yin Liu put down the bowl of soup in front of Chu Qingju and took the fan from a yahuan. She helped fan Chu Qingju at a moderate pace. Seeing the white sun outside, she gave a sigh. It's become hotter and hotter. I wonder when it will rain. You just came from outside, there's ice here. Careful not to get sick. Mu Jin pulled Yin Liu further away from the ice, smiling as she took the fan from her hand. Take care to not stink Wang Fei with your sweat. Yin Liu instantly protested her innocence. The two fell into battle, causing Chu Qingju to laugh. She put down the spoon to interject. Stop, stop. Let the kitchen make each of you a bowl of iced plum soup and stop your mouths. That's great, newbie certainly won't fuss. Mu Jin smiled as she walked back to Chu Qingju's side to fan her. Chu Qingju looked towards the door to see Huang Yang run over as he wiped away his sweat. She couldn't help but frown. Huang Yang wasn't this helter-skelter usually. Did something happen? Wang Fei, just now Wang Yi sent a message saying that he's afraid he can't return to the Fu. Huang Yang's head was full of sweat, his clothing and his back was all wet and he gasped as he spoke. Pour Huang Yang a cup of cold tea, Chu Qingju said with a grave expression. Did something happen in the palace? Huang Yang usually did care for his impression in front of Wang Fei, but the speed at which he drank tea was much faster than normal. After a bowl was drunk, he used his sleeve to wipe his mouth and narrated. Ming He Gonggong passed on that the emperor suddenly fainted today at court. All the Tai on duty at the imperial hospital were summoned into the palace. Wang Yi is there too. He was afraid that you would worry and specially sent a message for you. Was Qingde emperor He Mai, that he would have an incident every few days? Chu Qingju frowned. She felt that He Hung was more proactive today than all the other times Qingde emperor had been sick. Was it that this time, Qingde emperor's illness was dangerous? Seeing a roomful of yahuan who didn't dare speak, she said in a heavy tone, spread the news that before Wang Yi returns to the Fu will not receive guests. Anyone who needs to manage an affair outside the Fu must report to the stewards and register the time they left and the time they come back. Everything has to be recorded. If someone resists, throw them out of the Wang Fu. Huang Yang's eyebrows jumped. He pushed down the fear in his heart. Yes, this one will pass it on. After Huang Yang left, Mu Jin said uncertainly, Wang Fei, this matter Fu Huang is a son of heaven, he would be protected by the heavens. Chu Qingju held the spoon to take a sip of the lily silver tree ear fungus Buddha fruit soup. With a calm face, she said, make sure the servants control their mouths. If I hear something that shouldn't be said, everyone will be heavily punished. Yes, Mu Jin detected Wang Fei's cautiousness and exchanged a glance with Yin Liu. She hurriedly left to start managing the other servants. A bowl of lily silver tree ear fungus Buddha soup was soon finished. Chu Qingju took out a handkerchief and slowly wiped her mouth clean. She stood to walk next to the bed. The winds had picked up, and thick clouds started to appear on the horizon. The sky was half light, half dark with clouds. Wang Fei, newbie thinks that it is going to rain. Yuzon noticed the wind was too heavy and afraid that the window would block Wang Fei's line of sight, reached out to hold the window. She looked at the horizon and gasped, such mighty winds and thick clouds. The rain won't be small. Chu Qingju smiled. No matter how heavy, after it comes down, it has to stop. We are inside, what is there to be afraid of? Staring at the thick clouds as they came closer, Chu Qingju's brows furrowed. She kept feeling anxious inside. Chapter 84 Death of the Emperor. The interior of Tianqi Palace was suffocatingly hot, but no one dared to complain, not even to wipe away the sweat on their heads. All their attention was focused on the dragon bed. The man lying there was the master of their honor and even their lives. The Tai present took their turns as they shakily checked the pulse. When they had finished, they knelt in front of the Empress. The Dean of the Imperial Hospital said in a trembling voice, Empress Nyang Nyang, His Majesty's pulse is as thin as silk, faltering occasionally before rising. This official has no solution. Wasn't His Majesty just overwhelmed by the heat? The Empress's expression changed dramatically. She might not know medicine, but even she knew that only the mortally sick would have a weak pulse. She looked at the Tyee, their faces pale even in the sweltering heat, and ground out, "No matter what, you have to make His Majesty wake up." The Tyee present exchanged looks between themselves and gritted their teeth as they complied. The Empress looked at the unconscious man on the bed and wiped away the sweat on her forehead. She thought for a while before summoning a messenger. Taijian, the Emperor is seriously ill. Even if it's not good to have too much noise, but as a father, he would certainly be thinking of his children. Summon Duan Wang, Rui Wang, Cheng Wang and Jin and Princess from outside the hall. Xu Guifei and Jing Guifei should also come in to attend. Outside Tianqi Palace, all the Feipin who had children, the princesses, and the Wang Yi were all standing in the scorching sun as they waited. Seeing a Taijian come out, the eyes that had been scattered due to the blinding sun instantly became spirited. Passing the decree of the Empress to summon Jing Guifei, Xu Guifei, His Highness Duan Wang, His Highness Rui Wang, His Highness Cheng Wang, and Jin and Princess Royal to attend. After the Taijian passed on the Empress's decree, he didn't look at anyone's expression as he hurried back into the hall. The others were discontent but had no other solutions. Right now, the Emperor was unconscious, so the Empress held the highest status in the palace. If she said not to let someone in, who dared to force their way in? The group of people entered the humid hall. Xu Guifei furrowed her brow as she complained, "It's so hot inside the room, why not use some ice?" The Empress glared icily at her. "Right now, His Majesty's pulse is weak. How could we use anything cold? If Xu Guifei finds it too hot, then go back to your palace to rest. The Emperor here won't lack people to attend him." Xu Guifei was stung by the Empress' words. She didn't feel happy inside, but due to the other's position, she could only bow to the Empress. Pinky was just worried that the Emperor would overheat. "Please, Empress, forgive Pinky's slip of the tongue." The Empress looked at her and then her gaze swept across He Yuan beside her, not paying any more attention to her. She turned to look at the Tyee who was performing acupuncture and massaging the Emperor. Her voice was heavy as she announced, "The Emperor's illness this time is critical, the pulse is very weak. You serve well." The people who were called in instantly changed their expressions. They were all understood what a weak pulse meant. But why did it suddenly become like this? The person with the ugliest expression was most likely Xu Guifei. She looked at everyone in the room. If the Emperor passed like this, how likely would it be that her child would succeed the throne? Thinking about it, she looked with enmity at He Heng, whose face was full of anxiousness. If Wei Yisha's son became the Emperor, would there even be a space in this Da-long dynasty for her and her son? Why is it like this? Xu Guifei's voice got louder, and became rather piercing. The Emperor was fine yesterday, how could his pulse be weak? She started to cry mournfully, occasionally calling for His Majesty. Jing Guifei wasn't like Xu Guifei, but the rims of her eyes reddened and tears silently ran down. A short while later, the handkerchief in her hand was sodden from her tears. But she didn't notice it. She only stood by the dragon bed as she cried silently. Qingde Emperor seemed to hear a piercing voice which made his head hurt. When he managed to open his eyes, he saw a woman dressed in peach red kneeling in front of him. When he focused, he saw Xu Guifei's tearful face show happiness. His heart moved, and when he opened his mouth to speak, he saw Jing Guifei standing at the end of the bed. Her swollen eyes were centered on his body. Even though she didn't say anything, he could feel her worry and concern for him and the joy when she saw him awaken. He wanted to sit up and say that he was fine but found his body was paralyzed. He wanted to say a few words, but found it difficult to even breathe. He moved his eyes and saw the woman dressed impeccably by his side, and the woman standing by the bed whose attire was disheveled and her hair not even properly made up. A long time later, he closed his eyes and found strength deep inside his body to order, summon the Chief Justice Tian Jin-ku, Minister of Revenue Luo Changqing, Prime Minister Wei Wenguang, Minister of Rights Zhong Yucheng, Commander of the Imperial Guard Sun Zhongyu. After just a short sentence, Qingde Emperor was gasping for breath. Xu Guifei, kneeling in front of him, felt her hands become cold. Her intuition told her that this man who had favored her for more than 20 years was most likely going to leave her. She was sad inside, but she felt even more frantic. Did this man remember the promise he had made, that he would leave the throne to Yuana? Emperor, look at Yuana, he came to see you. Shu Guifei stood to pull Yuan next to the bed and said frantically, did you forget that you once said you wished to climb mountains with Yuana and ride horses? You haven't done those things yet. After you recover, you'll have to fulfill your promises. Qingde Emperor looked at his most favored third son. He had changed this child's diapers, washed his feet, carried him on his back to play on the bed. He had watched this child grow up, bit by bit, to become a handsome youth. Fu Huang, Yuan knelt of Qingde Emperor's bed, his eyes red as he pled, "A Chen remembers every word you said. Please recover quickly." Yes, at that time he had said many things, even promising that his third son will be the next emperor. But after all these years, he hadn't installed him as crown prince. His third son's personality was too arrogant. He had always been waiting for him to mature. But now, he didn't have the strength to keep waiting. His blurry gaze passed Yuan's shoulders to see the second son standing a few steps away. This was the child that Wei Shi gave birth to for him. He remembered his schooling was good, his protocol was good, and he was filial. He had bestowed many things to this son, but he couldn't remember anything else. When this child was small, he must also have been white and plump. He remembered when Wei Shi had carried him and he reached out to call him Fu Huang. The children had grown up, but he was old. Emperor, the Daren have all arrived. The chief Taijian reported in a small voice. Summon. Qingde Emperor moved his eyes away and said weakly. When Tianjin Ku and the others entered the hall, they detected that something wasn't right. When they saw the emperor's rosy face, their hearts jumped and they quickly knelt down. This official greets emperor, greets empress. Qingde Emperor didn't call for them to rise but ordered, prepare the 4 treasures of the study. Shu Guifei stared with wide eyes as the Taijian brought the instruments. She knew what the emperor was doing, her heart seemed to be trying to burst out of her throat. Zhen dictates, official Tian writes, you all listen. Qingde Emperor's gaze slowly swept across everyone in the room. In the end, he saw Jing Guifei in the corner, clearly sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe yet not making a sound. He closed his eyes. A beat later, he opened them, his eyes full of determination. Yuan saw his Fu Huang's gaze and felt that it wasn't reassuring. He couldn't help but ask, what Fu Huang once said, does it still count? Qingde Emperor glanced at him and slightly moved away. He took a breath. Ever since ascension the throne, Zhen had no achievements in governance, no ability to expand the borders, but had a son. Heng, born intelligent, benevolent and kind, of good moral character and governance of his household, with the virtues of Xiandi. After repeated thought, only this son is able to govern the world. Zhen therefore passes the throne to the second imperial son Heng and to pick an auspicious day for ascension. When he'd finished speaking, Qingde Emperor was gasping heavily and his sight became blurry. He looked at the jade seal and personal seal that were presented in front of him. Trembling, he raised the jade seal and pressed down on the imperial decree Tianjin Ku held up. Fu Huang. Yuan watched as the crimson stamp of the jade seal fell on the imperial decree and asked in disbelief, why are you changing your mind? Qingde Emperor didn't pay attention to him. He laboriously stamped his personal seal on the imperial decree. When he had finished, he seemed to have lost all energy, coldness creeping up his back. Fu Huang, why? Yuan tried to grab the imperial decree but was restrained by the Taijian. He turned to furiously stare at Heng. What ploy did you play that made Fu Huang create such a decree? The rims of Heng's eyes reddened as he replied, Sandy Eye, don't cause a fuss now, stop acting. Your mother and you always act. Other people might believe it, but I find it disgusting. Yuan looked heatedly at Qingde Emperor. Fu Huang, this is how you treat me. Qingde Emperor didn't seem to have heard Yuan's screams. He stared dazedly at the end of the bed, muttering, Chana don't cry, Chana Zhen was wrong. Shu Guifei's eyes suddenly widened, looking in disbelief at Qingde Emperor as though she didn't recognize the person in front of her. The hall was entirely silent. They didn't know who Chana was nor why the emperor was calling for her, and they also didn't know why the emperor would say that he was wrong. But they did know that Duan Wang was the future emperor. The heir had been determined and it would minimize the upheaval. It might have been a long time, or just an instant of time before Jing Guifei walked to Qingde Emperor and bent down to grasp his hand. Qingde Emperor looked at her, a smile appearing on his lips as he slowly closed his eyes. Jing Guifei's other hand trembled as she moved the index finger of her other hand under the nose of Qingde Emperor and her tears immediately fell down. Emperor! Xu Guifei pushed aside Jing Guifei, throwing herself onto Qingde Emperor's body as she loudly started bawling, Emperor. The chief Taijian knelt with a bang on the ground, loudly announcing, the emperor is dead. The people in the room knelt down like dumplings falling into the pot. Tianjin Ku knelt in front of He Heng, holding the imperial decree high up. The country cannot be without an emperor. Please, emperor, arrange for the funeral of Xiandi. This one kneels to request emperor to restrain your grief. Kneeling to request the emperor to restrain your grief. Everyone loudly mimicked. The people outside the hall sobbed as they knelt down. No matter if they were really sad or acting, at this moment, all of them were sobbing so much that they couldn't breathe. He Heng slowly reached out with both hands to receive the imperial decree from Tianjin Ku. He knelt in front of Qingde Emperor and gave 3 hard kowtows. A Chen is of mediocre ability, received Fu Huang's love today, and will strive to the utmost to govern the people of the world. After he had finished speaking, he staggered as he stood up, crying out loud. When the guards and Taijian guarding outside the hall heard that Duan Wang had succeeded the throne, they took advantage of the moment to silently retreat out, as though they had never appeared before. Suddenly, a clap of thunder sounded and the first rains of summer finally came pouring down. In Duan Wang Fu, Chu Qingju stood next to the window as she looked at the Wang Fu shrouded in mist, and occasionally fanned herself. A few days earlier, she had detected that He Heng and He Ming had been secretly conspiring on some matters. Did they manage to account for the possibility that Qingde Emperor would suddenly die? Thinking about it, Chu Qingju furrowed her brows. Why would she, for no reason at all, think that Qingde Emperor had passed away? Was she extrapolating too much? Chapter 85. Entering the palace. The winds and rain were strong, but they stopped as dusk approached. The sun even came out from behind the clouds, covering all of Jing with a coat of gold. Chu Qingju stood on the only 3-level tower in the Wang Fu. She narrowed her eyes to look at the shockingly beautiful sunset, a smile on her lips. Suddenly, a heavy bell rang out from the direction of the imperial palace. Because Duan Wang Fu was very close to the imperial palace, she could clearly hear the ringing. Mu Jin and the others behind Chu Qingju instantly changed their expressions, kneeling down and covering their eyes, trying their best to make themselves cry more sorrowfully. Huang Yuan even grievously moaned Emperor before using his sleeves to start wiping away his tears. Chu Qingju's head seemed to ring then blanked. She looked in disbelief at the imperial palace. Under the sunset, the imperial palace seemed to be coated in a layer of mysterious gold. If this kind of scene was exaggerated a bit, it would become a good omen. How was it that the emperor had passed away? She stilled before turning to order, quickly change everything in the fu that needs to be changed. Nothing bright should be seen. After seeing Huang Yang leave the tower with reddened eyes, she looked down at her own clothing. Let's return to Zhengyuan to change. Even though she wasn't sure of the situation in the palace, Chu Qingju still used the fastest speed possible to wash away the makeup on her face and also took off the peach-red corseted silk dress to change into a snow-white plain dress. The girdle she used was a neutral-colored one. She took down all the pouches and pendants on the dress, put her hair in a simple style, using a few hairpins to secure it, and even took down her earrings. The servants in the Wang Fu also took off the bright clothes they wore. White lanterns with black characters and white banners were hung up in the Wang Fu. Anything red in color was stored away. Jiang Yongyu watched as the servants in her rooms hurriedly put everything away. She changed into a dark green cotton dress. She asked Ari Lu beside her, "Has Wang Fei given any orders?" Ari Yu helped remove the adornments in her hair and changed her hairstyle to a simple one, securing it with 2 silver hairpins. Wang Fei didn't have any orders. She just said for everyone to clean up what should be cleaned up and hang what is required. Jiang Yongyu faintly frowned. She walked uncertainly to the gate of her yard and looked at the servants walking outside, sighing, "I don't know what the palace is like now." Arilu knew that her mistress was worried about the new emperor. Right now, it was good if their Wang Yi succeeded the throne. If Rui Wang succeeded, their lives from now on wouldn't be very peaceful. "What, you can't wait either?" Feng Zijin held Xie Yun's hand and looked disdainfully at Jiang Yongyu. "I had thought that you would endure longer, but aren't you just the same?" Jiang Yongyu calmly looked at the sapphire in Feng Zijin's hair and commented indifferently, "If you have the time to come over and fuss, why don't you take down what you are wearing?" If Wang Fei knew, I wonder if she would get angry. "You're just a dog of Wang Fei, what do you have to be smug about?" Feng Zijin snorted and held Xie Yun's hand to leave. Ari Lu retorted in anger, "She's a shitxie who's unfavored by Wang Yi, there's nothing to be proud of. Her father is a third-grade assistant minister in the Ministry of Works. My father is under his command. It's natural that she dares to show off in front of me." Jiang Yongyu gave an ambiguous smile, "There's no need to argue with this kind of person." Ari Lu looked at the smile on her mistress' face. Even though she didn't understand why, her anger lessened. The main gate to the palace opened, and a fourth-grade imperial bodyguard rode a horse as he raced out of the palace. The guards saw that he was going in the direction of Duan Wang Fu and were envious. The people of Duan Wang Fu were going to rise on their master's success. Following him was a troop of bodyguards accompanying a carriage as it proceeded out of the palace. White flowers were hanging on the carriage, but from the structure, it was the carriage that only the empress had the status to ride. They instantly understood. This carriage most likely was going to receive Duan Wang Fei. Chu Qingju's face was strict as she sat in the front hall of Duan Wang Fu. Behind her were 4 Yahuan and 4 Taijian. Everyone's face was grave. Looking at the doors to the hall pushed wide open, Chu Qingju took a sip of holly tea. The pale finger tapped gently on the table, releasing that small bit of anxiety inside. "Wang Fei, the imperial decree from the palace has arrived." Huang Yang raced in, his face joyous yet sad, looking very comedic. But Chu Qingju didn't have any mirth on her face. She slowly stood and watched as a person dressed in the dark uniform of the imperial bodyguards stride in and then kneel in front of her. "The emperor has decreed to especially welcome Nyang Nyang into the palace to manage the affairs of the Hugong." Qingde emperor was dead. The person that would be called emperor now could only be the new emperor, and the women of the new emperor naturally could be called Nyang Nyang. Chu Qingju slightly nodded, "This Da Ren, please stand." She examined the person, confirming that he really was an imperial bodyguard before responding, "Is the emperor well?" "The emperor is fine, but due to his grief, he hasn't drank or eaten," the imperial bodyguard respectfully answered. "The emperor especially let Wei Chen come here first to give the decree. The carriage and guards will arrive shortly. Nyang Nyang, please wait for a moment." Chu Qingju nodded calmly. The peaceful state she expressed made the imperial bodyguard who had passed on the decree admire her. No wonder she was Duan Wang Fei. Even facing a major event such as Duan Wang succeeding the throne, she could be so peaceful and not lose her composure. She really was majestic and had the composure necessary to mother the world. Mu Jin and the others behind Chu Qingju were bursting with joy, but due to the fact that an outsider was present, they managed to keep up the expression on their faces. Mu Jin came up to support Chu Qingju's arm and asked in a small voice, "Nyang Nyang, why don't Newbie go pack some things?" Chu Qingju nodded and asked the imperial bodyguard, "Da Ren, please sit." "What should Da Ren be called by?" "Wei Chen doesn't dare." The imperial bodyguard raised his hands. Wei Chen is a 4th-grade imperial bodyguard Jiao Jin, and had been a bodyguard before in the Wang Fu for a time. Chu Qingju nodded. She knew that this person was most likely one of He Hung's people. She calmly sat down at the front of the hall, not speaking anymore. A short while later, the carriage arrived. Mu Jin and the other Yahuan had finished packing. Chu Qingju allowed some of her personal attendants to follow as she walked out of the main gate of the Wang Fu. When she saw the majestic carriage, she sighed, and paused in her steps before using Mu Jin's hand as support to enter the carriage. The common people on the side of the street had been already ordered back by the guards. Chu Qingju sat in the carriage and found it slightly boring. In the past, when she sat in a carriage, She could still hear the voices of some passerbys. Now, other than the sound of the axles, the ground, and the hoofs of the horses, she couldn't hear anything. Was this the difference between a Wang Fei and the Empress? The carriage didn't stop after it entered the palace. She slightly lifted up the curtain and saw people all kneeling on the ground. All of them were trembling and cautious, as though if she frowned, they would lose their lives. The carriage traveled a short distance past the palace doors before stopping. Chu Qingju got off the carriage and got on the phoenix carriage to sedately circle around to reach Tianqi Palace. When she got off the phoenix carriage, she saw He Heng standing at the top of the jade stairs. She stood at the bottom of the jade stairs, staring into his eyes. Step by step, she made her way up. Each step was especially steady and especially strong. Just when there were 3 steps left between her and He Heng, he actually walked down the steps and firmly took hold of Chu Qingju's hand. The two ascended to the top of the stairs together. He Heng lifted his head to look at the plaque of Tianqi Palace. Fu Huang's morning hall has been set up in Shoukang, Palace. Later, you and I should go to pay our respects. Chu Qingju suddenly understood. So Qing de Emperor's corpse was already not in Tianqi Palace. She turned to look down the jade stairs and found that the scenery at the top was drastically different compared to the bottom. She tilted her head to look at Tianqi Palace's sign. At this moment, she didn't know whether to say to restrain grief or congratulations. She turned to look at the man beside her. He wasn't as happy as she had thought, but had a kind of expected steadiness. After thinking for a bit, Chu Qingju decided to speak. I heard that you haven't eaten or drank. It's so hot right now. You can't harm your body. He Heng smiled. He looked at the dimming sunset at the horizon. If you are worried about me, then eat together with me. Chu Qingju nodded, concern on her bare face. The two walked together into Tianqi Palace. Food was very quickly brought up. Even though there wasn't any meat, the dishes were very finely made and didn't diminish one's appetite. After eating and rinsing, He Heng wiped his mouth as he remarked, these days, the palace would be busy. You should follow Muhu to manage the affairs of the Hugong. After everything is settled, that would make it easier for you to manage the Hugong. Chu Qingju's eyebrows twitched. Did He Heng mean that Hugong was going to be under her management in the future? There are 2 Muhu in the palace, it doesn't need me to do this. Chu Qingju smiled as she responded, does Emperor not worry that it could exhaust me? How would I not worry for you? But this is our Hugong. You have to run it. He Heng gave a warm smile. If I give it to anyone else, I won't feel at ease. Chu Qingju looked at his eyes and found that he looked extremely serious as he spoke, so serious that she almost believed it. A silent beat later, Chu Qingmu smiled and complied, all right. In Zhongjing Palace, Jing Guifei slowly waved the fan in her hand and remarked to Ding Mema beside her, the emperor welcomed Chu Qingju into the palace. Ding Mema answered, newbie heard that right now, Nyang Nyang is keeping the emperor company for the evening meal. Jing Guifei nodded, that's good, with her there, the emperor knows to take care of his body. Ding Mema hesitated before being unable to resist asking, but if Chu Nyang Nyang entered the palace, this Hugong Ben Gong's son's Hugong should be handed to Ben Gong's Erxi to manage. Jing Guifei's expression grew serious, do not mention this matter again. Ding Mema's face paled, her body sinking lower into a bow, newbie slipped, Nyang Nyang, please forgive me. Jing Guifei's expression relaxed and she continued to wave the plain circle fan in her hand, not speaking anymore. Chapter 86 Our Hugong. What did you say? Duan Wang succeeded the throne? Liang Shi stood in front of a black-bricked farmhouse, face pale as she looked at her nephew. To her, the news was the worst possible. She muttered disbelievingly, why is it Duan Wang? What about Rui Wang? Rui Wang? Liang Hong looked at Gumu's state and sighed. Rui Wang, due to making a fuss in Shendi's morning hall, caused everyone's dissatisfaction. Thankfully, the emperor was merciful and didn't punish him heavily, just sentenced him to kneel in the morning hall to reflect. Wasn't Rui Wang the most favored by Shendi? Why is it like this? Liang Shi staggered, and a beat later, she started to cry. Then what about Suo? What should she do? Now that Rui Wang couldn't become the emperor, Suo was still a Kie. What good life would she have in the future? Liang Hong saw how violently Gumu was crying and didn't know how to comfort her. In the beginning, he hadn't been in favor of Biao Mai becoming a Cheshire. Now that Rui Wang Fu had lost power, Biao Mai as a Cheshire, would she even have a comfortable life in the future? He looked at the brick farmhouse behind Gumu and couldn't help but think of the 3 Biao Mai of Chong de Gong Fu. The eldest Biao Mai married Duan Wang. Now that Duan Wang succeeded the throne, eldest Biao Mai was certainly going to become the empress. She had to wait for the immediate mourning period to pass before she could be formally titled. Biao Mai might have been a Shu daughter, but after the Chu family fell, there was a prosperous Zui Cai that married her. In the end, it was San Biao Mai who had been birthed and raised by Gumu who became a shameful Kie. Was this all because Jiu Fu disregarded everything in order to marry Jiu Mu? Liang Hong took out a small pouch of silver. Gumu, our entire family is planning on moving back to the old home in Shijun. Take this silver. He saw Liang Shi standing woodenly and pushed the silver into her hands. Now that the new emperor is ascending to the throne, he would pardon some people. I already got someone to find out. Gu Fu will soon be released from the prison. When the time comes, you should try to live a good life. I will bid farewell to you here. He had lived in the Fu of the Chu family for a significant amount of time. Now that the entire family was leaving, the only thing he could leave behind was just this small pouch of silver. Biao Ji is leaving. Chu Wangji walked out of the room. He was wearing a dusty sackcloth robe, his hair disheveled. His overall appearance was very sorry. Liang Hong looked at the state of his Biao Di and with some pity, he raised his hands to bid, "Goodbye, take care." Chu Wangji looked at the figure of Biao Ji as he left, the terror in his heart growing. By this time, even Biao Ji's family was moving away, and the Da Jie who had been abused by his mother was going to become the empress. Would his family even be able to make a living? He suddenly felt resentment towards his mother. If mother had treated Da Jie better, they wouldn't have fallen this low. Liang Shi looked with discontent in the direction of the imperial palace. When she turned and saw the sorry figure of her son, she couldn't breathe and fainted. Before entering the darkness, she saw her son's panicked and helpless eyes. By now, the Hugong was a mess. The consorts of Shendi all had to move out of the places they had been living in. It was fine for those who had been favored and had children. They only had to move towards the place in the Hugong for the Tai Fei. Those that didn't have children and weren't Fei could only move to a makeshift palace in the Jing suburbs to live out the rest of their lives. Chu Qingju looked at the list of Shendi's Tai Fei and took a count. There were 20-something that held a position. Other than those of high position or had children, there were 12 who had to move to the outside palace. As to those who had been favored by Shendi but didn't have a position, according to the traditions, they were going to be sent to a monastery in the Jing suburbs to become nuns with no hope of leaving for the rest of their lives. Chu Qingju sighed and closed the list in her hand. According to the traditions, do the favored women have to be sent to the monastery? Qian Chang Xin looked at the list that Nyang Nyang had folded up. He bowed as he replied, "Nyang Nyang, that was the usual method. However, it isn't required to send the women that had been favored into the monastery to become nuns. If that's the case, then arrange for these people to move to the auxiliary palace in the Jing suburbs. That palace might not be as comfortable as the imperial palace, but it would be better than a destitute monastery." Chu Qingju furrowed her brow as she continued, "There will be more people, and even though it would mean more spending each year, with only these women, it wouldn't be a big expenditure. A monastery with only nuns had no sources of income. Going there, it's the same as prison. As a woman, she didn't have the habit of making things difficult for other women. Qingde Emperor had ruled for several decades and only favored this number of women total. In this kind of era and dynasty, he really couldn't be considered to be lustful. Nyang Nyang is kind, Nukai will order for it to be carried out." Chen Changxin received the list and took out a blueprint. Taihuniang Nyang has already moved from Kuei Yuan Palace to Chongning Palace. This is the blueprint for the renovation of Kuei Yuan Palace. Does Nyang Nyang require any place to be changed? This Muhu Huang Taihu, 3, had moved out. The new owner was this person in front of him. Chu Qingju took the blueprints to take a look and became dizzy looking at the straight and perpendicular lines. She responded, "I'll look at the blueprints, it's not likely that there would be any major problems." Qian Changxin didn't say anything and announced that the emperor was coming over for the evening meal before retreating. Chu Qingju stood at the window of the back hall of Tianqi Palace. She could see Kuei Yuan Palace located in the same center meridian as Tianqi Palace. These two palaces were the only palaces that were constructed in the center. The two palaces were also the closest to each other, but the previous owners of these two palaces were like strangers, full of mutual respect between them, and until death there weren't any feelings. She had heard Jin Zhon narrate what had happened when Shendi had passed. Jin Zhon's storytelling abilities were good, and when she narrated, it was as though she was there. Because of that, Chu Qingju felt that it wasn't easy being a person in the Hugong. The Empress' calm intelligence, Xu Guifei's loss of composure, and Jing Guifei's heartbreaking grief, as well as Wen Guipin and An Guipin, who couldn't even enter the gate of Tianqi Palace. Qingde Emperor held Jing Guifei's hand when he died. Some said that he was smiling when he left. Chu Qingju didn't understand. Wasn't Qingde Emperor's true love Xu Guifei? But why, at the very end, he was only concerned with Jing Guifei? And that Channa or Channa, who was it, Jing Guifei or another woman? The day that Shendi was buried, Chu Qingju and He Hung wore mourning clothes as they guarded Qingde Emperor's corpse all the way to his tomb. And then it was kneeling west and kneeling east. When He Hung recited the lament, Chu Qingju knelt with the other people underneath as they sobbed. After the funeral finished, she felt that her legs weren't legs anymore and her eyes were a line. The hemp mourning clothes so wet, water could be wrung out. When she finally made it back to the palace, it was already deep in the night. Chu Qingju soaked in the bathtub until she felt herself be revitalized. When she just finished dressing, she saw He Hung walk in wearing a light-colored silk robe. When He Hung entered the room, he saw Chu Qingju looked tired but wasn't harmed by the scorching sun, and his heart was relieved. He took the towel from Mu Jin's hand and started to dry Chu Qingju's wet hair for her. It was hard for you these days. He sighed, a few more days, and the people of the Fu have to be received. Their positions, do you have any thoughts? According to protocol, other than the wife, the other women of the new emperor must wait at least 27 days after Shendi's passage before they could enter the palace. The official titles could only be bestowed after 3 months. But no matter what had to be arranged needed to be arranged. Even if they couldn't be instantly titled, but the rank they would receive and where they would live had to all be finalized. Chu Qingju snatched the cotton cloth from He Hung's hands, slowly rubbing her hair herself. They are Emperor's Fei Pin, I can't decide. Seeing the other's distant eyes, He Hung felt slightly bitter inside. He sighed, and pinned down the hand Chu Qingju was using to dry her hair. They are just the Fei Pin in the Hugong. You are my empress, the woman who is going to accompany me my entire life. Naturally, you are the one to decide such matters. Chu Qingju suddenly smiled. She threw the towel to one side, looking at He Hung with a smile, asking, Emperor, is that a promise? Even though Chu Qingju's tone was joking as she said the words, but He Hung felt that the other was especially serious when she asked it. His heart shook. Gazing at her as he solemnly nodded his head, he leaned over to kiss her forehead. What I say is true. Chu Qingju silently lowered her face. Following that, her eyes changed and she smiled as she replied, Since Emperor has said it, then I will decide the ranks of the women in the Hugong in the future. Since she had already decided to live each day like it was her last, she wouldn't change anything now. How long He Hung could tolerate her, that was how long she would run rampant. When it came to the day that He Hung couldn't tolerate her, the worst was just death. Who never died since the beginning of time, it was just dying in pleasure or in hardship. Detecting that the other had strangely become energetic, He Hung didn't understand why she would change so fast, but that bit of dejection in his heart instantly disappeared. He smiled as he took up the towel to start drying Chu Qingju's hair again. Jiangsha's birth might not compare to Fengshe, but she is a very steady person and understands her bounds. Why don't we promote her to Fei and let her reside in Yu Ping Palace? Luo Shi is of few words but a docile person. She would be perfect for a third-grade Gui Pin. The first person to serve you was Han Shi. But since she was of low birth, how about she gets granted a 5th-grade Liangdi? As to Fengshe, she has a good birth, but she was demoted to Shiqie from Ce Fei. I don't have any good feelings towards her. So Emperor, you can decide her rank. Chu Qingju straightforwardly expressed her likes and dislikes. As to what He Heng thought, she was too lazy to care so much. He Heng truly didn't think Chu Qingju would blankly tell him that she didn't like a certain shiqie. Seeing her look as though she didn't care what he thought, his mood was light as he responded, "The others will do according to you. As to Fengshe, since you don't like her and I don't like her, she'll be a 7th grade siren. No matter what, she has been in the Fu for a significant amount of time, it wouldn't be appropriate if it was lower than 7th. As to He Heng's last sentence, which seemed like an explanation, Chu Qingju glanced at him from the corner of her eye. "This is what Emperor decided, it has nothing to do with me. Didn't I say I didn't like her? It has nothing to do with you." He Heng touched her hair and found it was almost dry. He reluctantly stood. "It's late, and you were out the whole day, have an early rest." Because it was the hot morning period, they couldn't even spend much time together, even in private, much less have any relations. Chu Qingju smiled as she watched him leave the back hall. She reached to pluck at her hair, the smile on her lips becoming more evident. The 34th year of Qingde Emperor of Da Long dynasty, passed away. The second imperial son succeeded the throne. Because of Xiandi's death due to illness, the new emperor was struck with grief, indicating that for the year, the era name would still be kept as Qingde, and he would observe mourning for 3 years. His officials were moved by the emperor's filial piety, but due to the emperor's position being a busy yet honorable one, observing mourning for 3 years would damage the dragon's body and not beneficial to the country. So after the entire royal court pleaded numerous times, the new emperor finally agreed to substitute years with months and observe mourning for 3 months. Due to this matter, the new emperor spoke of his unfilial conduct and made atonements many times in the mourning hall of Xiandi and visited to light incense every day. His actions received the praises of the scholars in the world, and many wrote stories and told tales to express the filial piety of the new emperor. Regardless of what happened at royal court, 1 month after the passing of Xiandi, Chu Qingju finally sent the order to receive the shiqie of Duan Wang Fu into the palace. Of course, other than He Heng and some of the personal servants, no one else knew that the positions of the shiqie weren't decided by the emperor, but decided by the empress. Consorts of a deceased emperor, is long, forever is peaceful. 3. Literally means Mother Empress, Grand Dowager Empress. 4. The first Chan means beautiful, the second means cicada. V. Imperial consort, middle rank /N. Chapter 87. Stupidity. The master and mistress of Duan Wang Fu might have already entered the palace, but there were still guards at this place. The people passing by knew that this compound was the home of the new emperor before he ascended the throne and was extra careful as they passed by. By now, even the paternal families of the Cheshire of Duan Wang Fu status were elevated in status. Even though not many went to deliberately fawn over them, but they were now much more courteous. For the Cheshire of Duan Wang Fu, the fact that Wang Yi succeeded the throne, it was a great and joyful surprise. How could the shiqie of a Wang Fu be compared to being a nyang in the palace? Even more so, they had served before the emperor ascended the throne, so their ranks wouldn't be very low. By that time, when the emperor wouldn't favor them, their ranks would still be passable enough that they would be written into the history books. If they were just shiqie of a Wang Fu, who would remember them after their death? But very quickly, their exhilaration disappeared. Wang Fei had been sent for to enter the palace the night the emperor entered. After that, no imperial decree came. Even though Xiandi's body was sent to the tomb and the emperor held the ascension ceremony, still no one came to receive them to enter the palace. Feng Zijin and Han Qinghe were frantic inside. They discussed it before going together to find Jiang Yongyu. At this time, Jiang Yongyu held the highest position among them. But when the two went into Jiang Yongyu's residence, they stilled. The two of them had been burning with anxiety, but this one was sitting under the willow reading a book. A cup of cold tea was placed in front of her, a Yahuan fanning her from behind. She looked very idle. Feng Zijin, who had always looked down at her calm attitude, moved forward to comment, "Jiang Fei is really restrained. At this time, you still aren't anxious." Jiang Yongyu closed the book. She looked at the two. My, please sit. Such a hot day, Why have you come to my place? The Yahuan brought over 2 stools to place behind the 2 of them. Han Qing he was also impatient but knew that Feng Zijin's words were inappropriate. She gave her thanks, smiled and sat down. These days, Emperor and Nyang both aren't in the Fu. I found it boring and thought to come to Jejie's place to chat. Jiang Yongyu knew Han Shi was impatient about entering the palace. Even though her words were prettier than Feng Shi, her thoughts weren't any less than Feng Shi. She raised a teacup and responded, "These are the tea leaves that Nyang especially had someone deliver a few days before. With one sip, it keeps the heat away. Mai should have a taste." Raising the teacup in front of her to take a sip, Han Qing he felt that the tea was slightly bitter, but after swallowing, she really did feel the heat inside slightly dissipate. She put down the teacup, smiling and complimenting. "The things that Nyang has bestowed, it's really great. We can see how Nyang cares for Jejie." Of the 4 shiqie in the Wang Fu, Chu Qingju wasn't close to anyone, but she treated Jiang Yongyu slightly better. Thinking about it, Han Qing he was slightly regretful. If she had copied Jiang Yongyu in the beginning and sided with Chu Qingju, then even if the emperor didn't favor her in the future, with the empress at her back, her days would be much better. Hearing the meaning in Han Shi's words that tried to flatter her, Jiang Yongyu gave a slight smile. "Nyang treats us all the same. Mai must be joking." Finishing, she looked at Feng Zijin. "Did Mai also come here to chat with me? I'm not going to beat around the bush with you. I'll just ask, do you know when we are entering the palace?" Feng Zijin didn't look at the tea on the table and impatiently waved the fan in her hand. "Don't say anything false. Are we going to be ignored by Nyang like this? The time we enter the palace, that's to be decided by Emperor and Nyang. How could I know?" Jiang Yongyu looked at the fan in Feng Zijin's hand. Painted on the fan were large blooms of red peonies. She curled her lips, remarking, "By now, there must be many matters in the Huyong. It hasn't been a month since the passing of Shendi. Both Emperor and Nyang must be grieving. Should we try to add even more trouble for Emperor and Nyang?" Feng Zijin glanced at the smile on Jiang Yongyu's face, snorting, "Jiang Si Fei has great composure. Since that's the case, I'm leaving." She stood, sneering, "If you're able, then don't enter the palace." Finishing, she rushed furiously out of the Ce Yuan. Han Qing he gave a dry laugh as she held a teacup. She looked at Ping Jizin's shadow. Feng Yanyang's personality is still the same. Entering the palace with such a personality, there's more waiting for her. Jiang Yongyu was used to Feng Zijin's conduct and calmly turned to say, "We are experienced people that have served at the emperor's side. Sooner or later someone will come receive us to enter the palace. There's nothing to be impatient about. Everything in the palace is changing. The mistresses of each palace have to move. We aren't the wife. Do we have the qualifications like Nyang to enter the palace early? Jejie is a rare clear-headed person. Mai has learned." Han Qing he smiled as she responded, "Nyang is virtuous and will certainly arrange everything. She might have been the first woman to serve Wang Yi, but in front of Jiang Yongyu, she could only call her Jejie." Thinking about how she would soon be entering the palace, she was apprehensive. She didn't know what rank the emperor would give her. She held the lowest position of the 4 at the moment, and her future position would be the lowest as well. Thinking about it that way, her excitement instantly halved. She remarked to Jiang Yongyu, "Between the 4 of us, my birth is the lowest. Even Luo Mai had a Jojo that died at his post. I don't have anyone." She thought of her father's 8th grade position. It was an official position, but in reality, it couldn't even compare to the gatekeeper of the Wang Fu. Why does Mai think that way? We all serve emperor. Does the emperor rank us according to our paternal families? Jiang Yongyu comforted, "You can't think that way." Han Qing he instantly realized. Nyang didn't even have a paternal family anymore. She couldn't say such things. Thinking quickly, she followed, "It was me that strayed off the road." That's right. As long as people can think, there is no challenge that can't be overcome. When Jiang Yongyu finished speaking, she saw a steward of the Wang Fu run in, his full of joy. Seeing them, he came up and bowed, reporting, "Mistresses, the emperor's imperial decree has come down. It's to receive all the Juzi to enter the palace." Jiang Yongyu counted the days. Today was the 32nd day since the passing of Xian Di. To enter the palace now, it was the perfect time. She looked in the direction of the imperial palace and sighed. She had packed everything, and was just waiting for this imperial decree to come down. Because of the death of Xiandi and the succession of the new emperor as well as the good weather, no one tried to discuss He Hung with any matters. The only thing that made him unhappy was that at this time, there was an imperial censor at court who said that Chu Qingju's status wasn't fitting to be the empress. He sat with a grave expression while listening to the imperial censor's words. Then he smiled coldly and responded, "According to what you say, then all the men would abandon their wives if their wife's paternal family did something wrong. Then how is there the chaff wife cannot be divorced? Or is it that, in the heart of imperial censor Qin, your wife can be voluntarily abandoned?" He slammed his hand down on the dragon chair, pointing angrily at the imperial censor, shouting, "Such a ruthless and unscrupulous person, how can you act as an imperial censor of my Da Long dynasty? If the imperial censors of the world were like you, my Da Long dynasty won't even have any virtues." Emperor. Imperial censor Qin didn't think the emperor would speak so severely. His legs softened and he knelt down. "Emperor, Wang Fei might be your wife, but she has such unprincipled elders, how can she mother the world? Is Qin Da Ren accusing my Tian family's daughter of being unprincipled?" Tian Jin-ku stepped out, tone wounded as he argued, "Emperor, this official's Mai might not have been a talented woman but she was of careful speech and good conduct, intelligent and virtuous. Even though she lost her life due to the unscrupulous actions of others, she was never unprincipled. Please, Emperor, give this official's Mai justice." Everyone knew that imperial censor had been focusing on the former Duke of Changde and Liang Shi. But Tian Jin-ku's sister was Wang Fei's birth mother. Imperial censor Qin had exposed the hole in the argument into the other's hand. "Emperor, this official thought that because Wang Fei's birth mother had been once praised by Xiao Cigong Empress, and had been taught from childhood by the Marquis of Xiongqing, as a person she is extremely generous and virtuous. She is also emperor's wife and the only choice for empress. The crimes that the Chu family committed, Wang Fei was a victim. Imperial censor Qin has no sympathy but tries to slander Wang Fei's reputation. It is really outrageous. This official earnestly requests emperor to severely punish this person and give Tian Da Ren justice." Luo Changqing's face was also grave as he walked out. Xiao Cigong Empress had been Xiandi's deceased Muhu. Luo Changqing mentioned her to elevate the status of Chu Tianshi. This subject seconds. Wei Wenguang stood out. This subject Di agrees. He Ming followed in stepping out. This subject agrees. All of the senior officials present could see the affection of the emperor towards Wang Fei. Even more, Duan Wang Fei still had the Tian family at her back. This imperial censor Qin was a member of the educated and literary family Qin clan, but he had done such a stupid thing. "Come, take away this person's post, he cannot be used in this lifetime." He Hung icily looked at imperial censor Qin whose complexion became terrible. In a deep voice, he announced, "Scholars should first learn their morals. Otherwise, no matter how many books they read, it's useless if they lose their emotions. The matter of the empress is settled, Jin will only establish Chu Shi as empress, and no other." The words at the beginning were good, but everyone paused when they heard no other. Following, they all knelt down. "Emperor is caring and benevolent, us subjects will follow the example." Looking in satisfaction at the court officials kneeling under him, He Hung stood, announcing, "End of court." The people knelt as they watched the emperor leave before slowly standing up. Many started to praise the virtues of the emperor. After today, it was likely that in Da Long dynasty, there would be less men that would favor a Kye and neglect their wife. Men that would respect their wives would increase in number. Even Tian Jin-ku didn't think that the emperor would make such a promise such as this in front of all the officials. He didn't seem to be able to believe it, that the emperor had decided to only have his niece as his only empress this entire life. "Virtuous son-in-law, shall we walk together?" Luo Changqing smiled as he walked in front of Tian Jin-ku, reaching out to pat his shoulder. "Father-in-law first." Tian Jin-ku raised his hands and made a motion of request, dropping half a step behind Luo Changqing. Luo Changqing didn't persist with him. The two slowly left the great hall. He remarked, I heard long ago that Nyang Nyang and Rui Wang Fei's relationship wasn't good. From the looks of it today, it really isn't a rumor. Tian Jin Ku jerked his lips. Father-in-law is right. But the Qin family was too obvious and ham-fisted this time. He smiled happily. No matter what, the fact that the emperor would care for his niece so, his deceased sister could rest in peace. Emperor, Qian Chang Xin looked at the terrible expression on the emperor's face and cautiously held out a cup of tea. Qin Sha. He Heng pushed the teacup to throw the tea back, declaring, "It seems that there still isn't enough people serving in Jin San Di's Fu. /N. Chapter 88 Crowned Empress. Several plain carriages entered through the side door of the imperial palace's main gates. The guards protecting the doors watched as the carriages slowly moved away. This procession, compared to when the Empress Nyang Nyang had came into the palace, was drastically lacking. Right now, the emperor hadn't officially crowned the empress, but due to the fuss at royal court, who in the palace didn't know that Chusha was the unofficial empress? They didn't know how many palace maids and Taijian in the Department of Household Affairs were currently breaking their backs trying to get a chance to serve the empress. It was a pity that the emperor had personally picked the servants for empress. Just the amount of care that the emperor was taking was enough to let everyone in the palace understand very clearly that, in the heart of the emperor, those shichier of Duan Wang Fu added up together couldn't even compare to one finger of the empress. Stop. The long thin voice of a Taijian sounded from outside the carriage. The carriages simultaneously stopped. The Taijian in command looked at the carriages behind him and announced in a loud voice, "Please, mistresses, get off the carriage and proceed to the step carriage." Jiang Yongyu held Ari Lu's hand to get off the carriage. She saw that there were 4 step carriages not too far away, one of which was grander than the others. Before she could react, the Taijian who had been speaking walked in front of her, smiling as he greeted, "Greetings to Nyang Nyang, Nukai is Yuping Palace's chief steward He Shou. Please, come this way." He reached out his arm to usher Jiang Yongyu to the finest step carriage. As she supported Jiang Yongyu, Ari Lu's heart leapt in joy. This Taijian dared to call her mistress Nyang Nyang. Didn't that mean the emperor was going to give her mistress a high rank? After Jiang Yongyu settled on the step carriage, the Taijian raised a hand, up. He didn't care about the other 3 and walked away with Jiang Yongyu. After Jiang Yongyu's step carriage started moving, another Taijian came up to call the other women and ushered them onto the remaining step carriages to follow behind Jiang Yongyu. These shichier had to first greet the empress after entering the palace. After they traveled a certain distance, near the back hall of Tianqi Palace, the step carriages were lowered and the 4 had to proceed on foot. He Shou walked to the entrance of the back hall and said to the Taijian guarding the door, "The people of Duan Wang Fu have been received into the palace. Can I trouble Gong Gong to report?" The Taijian guarding the door wasn't as highly ranked as He Shou, but his post was at Tianqi Palace. He saw that He Shou was very polite and naturally didn't make it difficult for him. He raised his hands to He Shou, "So it's He Gong Gong. Please wait, this one will go in to ask." Thanks. The smile of He Shou's face became even friendlier. Seeing the other go in to investigate, he turned to walk next to Jiang Yongyu, informing in a small voice, "Nyang Nyang, because the renovations of Kuei Yuan Palace are quite extensive, the Empress is temporarily living in the back hall of Tianqi Palace. The Yu Ping Palace you will live in isn't far from Kuei Yuan, so it is very convenient for you to give morning greetings to the Empress in the future." Jiang Yongyu realized why this one called He Shou was the chief Taijian steward in her palace. She quickly examined him. Seeing his conduct and awareness of boundaries, he didn't seem stupid. She nodded. The Empress is of the highest position. It's natural that it would take more effort to renovate her residence. He Shou gave a smile, releasing a breath inside. Originally, he was worried that he would have to serve a stupid mistress. Taking a closer look now, this one was a smart person indeed. She should be one. Out of the 4 shichier, only she was made a fei. Even her residence was the Yu Ping Palace, which wasn't far from Kuei Yuan Palace. That, at least, made it clear that the Empress was closest to her. It wasn't clear whether the Emperor liked her or not. But if even the Empress didn't like her, how would he live in the future? Feng Zijin stood behind Jiang Yongyu, her expression ugly. From entering the palace until now, these people were overly and secretly flattering Jiang Yongyu. Was it that she would be the highest ranked out of the four of them in the future? She had the highest birth of the four, but why was the highest now Jiang Yongyu? Luo Yin Xiu and Han Qing he docilely stood nearby. They didn't dare to even raise their heads to look at the door to the back hall, and just waited for the Emperor's summons. The four stood for a while before the Taijian who had been guarding the door came out. His face was full of smiles as he announced, "The Empress invites Juzi inside, please." Jin Zhon came out and bowed to the four people. "Honorable mistresses, please follow Nubi." "Thank you for your trouble, Jin Zhon Gunyang." Jiang Yongyu smiled at her and lifted her foot to start walking towards the inside. "Nubi is not worthy." Jin Zhon retreated to the side and made an inviting motion, ushering the four inside the hall. "Nyang Nyang, the honorable mistresses have come," Huang Yang reported in a small voice. By now, everyone in the other parts of the palace called Chu Qingju the Empress, but the people who attended Chu Qingju still called her Nyang Nyang. That was because it hadn't formally come down, so it was inappropriate to call her Empress. Chu Qingju opened her sleepy eyes and saw the four walking in. They simultaneously knelt down, did a 3-bow, 9 kowtow full greeting. Chu Qingju kept her face up as she was bowed to by the four of them. After they finished, she gave them each a seat. She examined the four women. They were dressed tastefully. It seemed they had put some effort in their appearances to enter the palace. "It's been a long time since we saw each other. Is everyone fine?" Chu Qingju raised a teacup to take a sip, slowly waving the fan in her hand. "We wanted to welcome you into the palace earlier, but there were several reasons for the delay. One was that the residences hadn't been prepared, and the second was that it hadn't been long after the passing of Shendi. A few delays and the days became more than a month." "Thanks, Nyang Nyang, for thinking of us. Pinky is perfectly fine," Jiang Yongyu answered. "It's just that Pinky were all worried about Nyang Nyang, who was tired by the affairs of running the Hugong. So we didn't send any messages to you. After seeing you today, it does seem that Empress is thinner." It was a lie that Chu Qingju was thinner, but since she was wearing a white robe, she did seem weaker than she usually did in the Fu. Jiang Yongyu secretly examined the other. She didn't know if it was her false perception, but she felt that the Empress' appearance had changed from when she had just married into the Fu. But after thinking about her silent and dull personality when the Empress had just married, she attributed the changes to her dressing differently. Appearances originated from the heart. The core had been changed, so there were some changes in looks. Chu Qingju had looked at herself in the mirror and hadn't found much of a difference. She smiled and responded, "It must be that more sweat flowed under the hot weather of the summer which has caused the thinning." "That's so true. This summer is the hardest to endure." Han Qing he carefully took over. "Nyang Nyang also has to take care of the numerous matters of Hugong. How would you not thin?" Not long after they came in, they saw He Hung walk in wearing a soft brocade robe embroidered with dragons. He walked very quickly, not looking at the shichie sitting to the side, and raised the cup that Chu Qingju had been drinking tea from to take a mouthful. Then he sat down on the other chair at the front. The days are becoming hotter. Just coming in from the front hall was a struggle. "Greetings to Emperor." Jiang Yongyu and the others hastily stood and bowed. If He Hung didn't call for them to stand, they didn't dare straighten. "Ian, you entered the palace today?" He Hung glanced casually over the four people. He frowned slightly. "Since you have finished the greetings, return to your residences." He waves his hands, clearly not wanting too many people to remain here. Kia asks to be excused. Jiang Yongyu and the others bowed and left. Coming out of the doors to the back hall, they saw some Taijian holding long bamboo sticks with a cloth bag catching summer cicadas. They couldn't help but ask, "What are you doing?" He Shou, who had been waiting outside, quickly answered. Just now when the Emperor came, he heard the sounds of the cicadas and said that the Empress hadn't rested properly these days. He ordered the servants to drive away the cicadas so the Empress could take a good noon nap. Jiang Yongyu looked at the scattering cicadas. No wonder the Emperor was in a hurry to send them away. He had been annoyed with them for disturbing the Empress' noon nap. Walking at the back, Feng Zijin jerked her mouth but didn't dare say anything. She felt that the care that the Emperor took with Chu Qingju was becoming over the top. On the second day after the Shichie entered the palace, He Heng sent down the decree which bestowed the titles for the Hugong. The Empress of Shendi was made Mu Hu Huang Tai Hu, I, and was to reside in the eastern Changning Palace. He Heng's birth mother Jing Guifei was made Sheng Mu Huang Tai Hu, and her residence was the western Fu Shou, 3, Palace. And Gui Pin was promoted to Gui Taifei, Shu Guifei to Gui Taifei. According to the old traditions, both could be received by their sons to live outside the palace. The other Fei Pin of Shendi were also promoted. But some had to move to the auxiliary palace while others stayed in the palace. Zhen's wife Chu Shi, praised by Shendi to be full of good fortune, to be especially decreed in marriage to Zhen. Chu Shi entered the Fu at 15 years, gentle, excellent and perceptive, kind and virtuous, spirited and elegant, pitilessly intelligent, a rarity in the world. She serves Zhen personally in all matters, and is the epitome of a woman and the mother to the world. Zhen has such a wife, it is the blessing of the heavens. Today, this decree is sent to the world to crown her as the mother of the world. By the emperor, this imperial decree, which later historians believe it to be evidence of the great love He Heng held for his empress, was recited like so in front of all the officials. After one recitation at court, they had to recite it again in front of the empress. Afterwards, the imperial astronomers calculated an auspicious time to proceed with the full crowning ceremony for her to receive the gold seal and gold book, before it was truly over. When Chu Qingju heard the first-rank palace maid recite the imperial decree crowning her empress in Tianqi Palace, she was suspicious that this wasn't really a decree crowning her empress, but a love letter that He Heng wrote to her and broadcasted it to the world. What was spirited and elegant, pitilessly intelligent, a rarity in the world? And that Zhen has such a wife, it is the blessing of the heavens. Had he never heard a phrase called, "Show your love, die even quicker"? Congratulations, Empress. Congratulations, Empress. The palace personnel in the room all gave their congratulations, the smile on their faces even brighter than Chu Qingju's. With both hands, she took the imperial decree from the female official before she stood. Chu Qingju looked at the imperial decree in her hands. She knew He Heng's writing. The words on this imperial decree had been personally written by He Heng, and not by the imperial assistant. Congratulations, Empress. The female official performed a full greeting to Chu Qingju. Chu Qingju let someone reward the female official. After the official left, she saw the servants in the room were all brimming with joy and remarked, "Why is it that you are all happier than I am?" Mu Jin bent slightly as she replied, "Empress' happy occasion is Nubi's good occasion." "Why wouldn't Nubi be happy?" Chu Qingju smiled as she shook her head. She rewarded everyone in the back hall who had served her. After the people that had nothing to do all left, she read the imperial decree in her hand again. A long time later, she sighed, "Mu Jin, lock it up." In Zhuojing's eye, Fengzi Jin looked in disbelief at the imperial decree in her hand. She couldn't believe that the emperor only made her a small minor 7th-grade siren. By the mandate of heaven, the emperor has spoken. The daughter of the Feng clan served Zhen in the house. Today, is made a siren and given the title Ping, 4. Ping, what sort of title was this? After the better part of an hour, Chun Yu, who went out to gather news, came back. Fengzi Jin put down the imperial decree in her hands, asking, "Did you find out what the other people's ranks are?" Chun Yu trembled and shrank into her shoulders as she responded, "Zhuzi, Nubi. Nubi found out. Jiangxi Fei was promoted to Heng, V. Fei. Luo Yinyang promoted to Gui Pin, Han Yinyang. Was promoted to Liangdi. Even Han Qin, he was given a 5th-grade Liangdi." Fengzi Jin's face paled and she fell back into her chair. She looked dispiritedly at the imperial decree on the table. Did the emperor dislike her this much? I, Mother Empress Grand Empress Dowager, Holy Mother Grand Empress Dowager, 3, happiness and longevity, 4, means peaceful, flat, calm. V, worthy, virtuous /n. Chapter 89. The new Kuei Yuan Palace. After the people of the Hugong were titled, it was then time to give new titles to those who did service in the royal court. Of course, these new titles weren't like cheap lettuce that everyone could get a bite of. The first ones to be rewarded were the clans of the 2 empress dowagers in the 2 palaces. The paternal clans were all people of leisure. So he Hung only bestowed a noble title, full of glory but no real power. And then it was senior officials who served he Hung. They were promoted, and bestowed things. As for the people who had sided with He Yuan, sorry, go stand to one side, it's a miracle that you were being demoted. Of all of the rewards, the most spectacular one was given to Tian Jin-ku. His family already had a hereditary marquis title, but in Jing, where marquises were everywhere, his present position had all been due to his own efforts. Now the emperor waved his hand and made his hereditary marquis elevated to a hereditary first-rank duke, and bestowed the title Zhongyi. He also rewarded down 5,000 taels of silver to the Duke of Zhongyi to construct the compound, and generously personally wrote Zhongyi Gongfu on the plaque for the compound to bestow upon Tian Jin-ku. His imperial favor was enormous. Zhong, it was naturally referring to his loyalty to the emperor. As for Yi, some thought that it was the emperor remembering the care Tian Jin-ku gave to the empress as well as his call for justice for his sister, Tian Shi, so he was given the character Yi. When they compared the honored Duke of Zhongyi to the fallen Chu family, many sighed. It could be seen that people had to accumulate virtue. Karma really did come back to bite you. The Duke of Zhongyi might not have a good daughter, but he had a good niece. That was his life, they could only admire it. When Chu Qingju heard He Hung had elevated her Jojo to first-rank Duke of Zhongyi, she wasn't surprised. She had earlier detected that He Hung admired Juju and clearly enjoyed his personal conduct. Now that he was in power, he needed people like Jojo to work for him. Rather than saying that he was rewarding Jojo, it was better to say that he was telling the world just how much he admired talented people who were loyal to the throne. Ming He entered the back hall and bowed in front of Chu Qingju, mentioning Kuei Yuan Palace that was still in the process of renovation. Empress, the construction of Kuei Yuan Palace is almost done. Why don't you take a look to see if there are any places that are not to your liking so it could be changed? Then the decorations can be moved in. The renovation of Kuei Yuan Palace was the biggest project in Hugong. Over the past month, there were 3 shifts of people working day and night in order to renovate the palace according to the blueprints. Because they were afraid that the new paint would crack since it was being applied in the summer, blocks of ice were specially placed in all the areas a few days before painting commenced. It was obvious the amount of importance the emperor had placed on this matter. Chu Qingju looked at the sky outside. Today was shady and it wouldn't be too sunny to go outside. Ming He must have deliberately picked this kind of weather before he opened to speak. She nodded, responding, "Today there is a lot of shade. It will be good to take a walk. It's been suffocating for Ben Gong to stay inside all day." Because Tianqi Palace and Kuei Yuan Palace were very close, Chu Qingju didn't ride the phoenix carriage. She, along with her entourage, walked on the main road of the palace that led straight to Kuei Yuan Palace. As she entered the palace, she found that the inside was quite different to when she had first seen Kuei Yuan Palace. At that time, Kuei Yuan Palace had been spacious but felt quiet. Also, at that time, she had only been a Wang Fei who was going to see the empress. Now, she was the owner of this palace. The attitude wasn't the same. The house, the garden, and the trees in her view had already been meticulously turned over, so that when one entered, it would look tasteful yet bright. This was the so-called easy on the eyes. The flowers, grasses, and the fake mountain in the outside gardens were in the Jiangnan style so that from a glance, it would feel extremely elegant. Inside was the main hall. The doors and windows of the main hall were all new. A dragon and phoenix were carved on the door, and other designs had been carefully chosen for the windows. The main hall was the place where Chu Qingju would live. She found that every part of the main hall was in great taste, and she could see just how much effort the designer had put in. She couldn't pick out any place that was lacking. Ming He saw the empress wearing a satisfied expression and spoke. The emperor heard that some paints are damaging to the body and specially ordered them to use paints made from natural materials. Empress, take a sniff. The paints all have a fragrance. When Chu Qingju entered the room, she had detected a faint fragrance. Hearing Ming He's words, she smiled, responding, "The emperor took a lot of trouble." The emperor said that it's all good as long as the empress likes it. Ming He retreated a step to the side. "Nyang Nyang, please follow Nukai to the western side hall for a look." When the door of the western side hall was opened, Chu Qingju was stunned. Because inside was a very large white jade bath. On all four sides of the bath, there were two dragon heads. The wide gaping maws of the dragon clearly were the places for introducing the water. Beside the bath was a place enclosed in silk coverings. Chu Qingju brushed aside the silk and saw that inside was a very large couch. Beside the window there was a table and two comfortable recliners. From a look, it made one feel the impulse to lie down. She hadn't thought that He Hung would actually remember that she had wanted a swimming pool. She came out from under the silk canopy, walked to the pool and reached down to touch the warm and clear water. A long time later, she said, "Ben Gong likes it very much." Ming He smiled. He pointed at the two dragon heads at one of the sides. The dragon head with the sapphire inlaid is cold water, the dragon head with the ruby is the hot water. If Nyang Nyang likes it, then soak often. The emperor has already asked the dean of the imperial hospital. Appropriate amounts of swimming is good for the body. Chu Qingju stood and, for some reason, thought that for this big pool, it really wasted water and physical labor. Cold water in the summer was good, but if it was hot water, how many people were needed to boil water in order to fill the entire pool? Does the palace have a source of water? Chu Qingju straightforwardly asked. She liked to enjoy herself but wasn't so wasteful to have people labor just so that she could swim. Ming He smiled, explaining, "Don't worry, Empress. This place uses water from underground. It was actually a coincidence that there is a hot spring in the palace. The emperor ordered for the water to be transported here." Chu Qingju felt relieved. Looking at the night luminous pearls encrusted on the pool, each the size of an infant's fist, she wondered what this place would look like at night. When the palace maids and Taijian that served Chu Qingju stepped into Kuei Yuan Palace, they were already shocked stupid. Mu Jing was deeply moved. She had always thought a surprise around every corner was an exaggeration, but today, she found that there was a place like that. This Kuei Yuan Palace wasn't all covered in gold and white jade, but it felt unspeakably beautiful. Thinking about it, she felt suspicious. From the time the emperor ascended until now, it hadn't been even 2 months. What kind of genius could plan out the renovation in such a short amount of time and leave so much time for the craftsmen to work? Or was it that the emperor had people working before he had succeeded the throne? Her heart shook. Mu Jin slightly furrowed her brows, sensing that she was thinking of something she shouldn't have, and turned to put her attention on the empress. As she came out of the western side hall, Chu Qingju toured the eastern side hall. It had been changed to a place for writing and painting. The back hall was now her personal storage. After a tour of the entire Kuei Yuan Palace, Chu Qingju had only one thought. After all the furnishings were moved in, her Kuei Yuan Palace would most likely become even more magnificent than Tianqi Palace. Are the imperial gardens located behind the back hall? Chu Qingju pointed in the direction of the back hall. She had come to the palace multiple times, but the roads in the palace twisted and turned. She wasn't familiar with the major roads, and wasn't clear about the structure of the Hugong. Empress, as you come out of the back hall and go through a bamboo forest, there is a lotus pond located at the corner of the imperial gardens. When you go through the corridors over the lotus pond, you'd see the imperial gardens. Ming He meticulously explained. Chu Qingju nodded. She didn't have the desire to go tour the garden. The passing of Shendi wasn't even 2 months ago, and if the empress of the new emperor went to tour the garden at this time, it wouldn't be right if the news got out. Ben Gong has finished looking. The halls are very beautiful. Chu Qingju thought of the white jade pool. She smiled and added, after seeing the enormous effort the emperor has put in, Ben Gong likes it very much. Upon hearing this, Ming He raised his hands and replied, "It is good that the empress likes it." Nukai will leave now to report on the completion of orders. Nukai asks to be excused. Chu Qingju nodded. As she came out of Kuei Yuan Palace, she stepped on the clean black stone path and looked at the roses blooming on both sides of the path. Many butterflies were flying in between the flowers. For some reason, she suddenly felt that she was the Cinderella in a romance novel and He Hung was the rich CEO. When He Hung finished listening to Ming He's report, he couldn't help but smile. He remarked, if it was any other, they would have already praised it. But she had to care about where the water came from. He helplessly shook his head. It seems very hard to get on the good side of Zhen's empress. Luckily, there is a source of water. Otherwise, the pool that Zhen had specially constructed for her wouldn't have been used. These words expressed helplessness, but Ming He had attended to He Hung for more than a decade, so he knew that the emperor was happy. He bowed and served a new cup of tea. Emperor, Nu Kai feels that Nyang Nyang doesn't want the people to work too hard. How can other women compare to the empress? With an empress who mothers the world like this, it is the good fortune of the world. You're right, He Hung nodded. He took the teacup for a drink and started to annotate the memorandums on the table, a sliver of a smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. 2 more hours passed before Ming He saw the emperor stand. At a glance, he saw a dark-colored pouch embroidered with the character of luck hanging at the emperor's waist. The emperor liked to use the pouch the empress had embroidered for him, and scorned even the pouches made by the palace embroiderers from Jiangnan. He Hung looked outside and noticed that the sky had darkened. He was going to ask for the time, but then he saw a flash of lighting. Then, thunder started to rumble and the fierce wind blew so hard, the windows shook. To the back hall. He strode quickly towards the outside, clearly not caring that it was going to rain soon. Ming He and a bunch of younger Taijian held lanterns that were protected from the wind as they followed. He looked at the sky and saw another flash of lightning. A rainstorm was most likely going to come down this night. He looked at the emperor's slightly rushed figure. Was the emperor worried that the empress was afraid of thunder? Zhong is loyal, devoted. Yi is friendship, justice, righteousness /N. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.